Yes, sir.
Okay, it's noon, so we're going to get started on our previously announced solar workshop before our regularly scheduled board meeting today. So the agenda for today will include a solar workshop from 12 to noon. We'll have a brief public hearing on some tariff adjustments, and then we'll commence with our regular board meeting. So to begin with our solar workshop, what am I doing wrong? Okay. Mr. McElroy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We want to start, as we do every meeting, with a safety briefing. We are on the 19th floor of the JEA tower. Mr. Hobson is here. Mr. Hobson will be in charge of calling security and 911 in the event of an emergency. If that emergency causes us to evacuate, we will evacuate to the stairwell to the left of the elevators. We'll go down holding the handrail, the 19 stories, slowly and watching out for one another. Once we get downstairs on the main plaza level, we'll exit to the southeast corner, Church and Main, to the empty parking lot and gather there. I would ask everybody to look to their left and right and create a safety buddy and a network to make sure that everyone gets out safely. CPR, we'd have Mike Brost, who's trained in that, to help us should we need that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is Ms. Kessler on?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us.
And, Mr. Chairman, we're going to start with Mike Brost coming forward, and we've got some presentation material which has been handed out to the board to follow. We are going to talk in terms of Mike Brost, Jay Worley, and Steve McEnroe. I'll go through the material and what we've been working on over the last number of years, quite frankly, in terms of looking at a brighter energy future for JEA. We will have about 20 to 30 minutes of conversation presentation material, leaving us with about an equal amount of time for discussion with the board.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. Mr. Brost.
Thank you. Chairman, members of the board, appreciate an opportunity to be here with you all this afternoon on this. We've got some exciting things to talk about. Workshop is titled JEA's Vision for a Brighter Energy Future. Myself, Jay Worley, and Steve McEnroe. I'm going to take the first two agenda items once the PowerPoint starts responding. And just as a setup, the purpose of this workshop is to prepare the board, communicate, have some dialogue on a half dozen significant items that are on the board's agenda today. Those include revisions to our energy mix policy. That's a formal policy that the board last voted on back in 2010. We are proposing a significant expansion of universal solar, and connected to that, a new rate. So that's the rate hearing, or at least half of the rate hearing, which is something we're calling SolarMax. Solar Smart was put in place earlier this year at about June. This is a version of that that's targeting much, much larger commercial industrial customers. We also have revisions proposed for our distributed generation policy, and along with that, what we think is a fairly innovative and creative in terms of our industry battery incentive program for storage behind the meter. A couple of key definitions just to kind of get grounded in some basics. The rate is the number we multiply our customers' consumption by to come up with the monthly bill. Pretty simple. The fuel, of course, the commodity we use in our generated electricity, natural gas, coal, petcoke, diesel. Net metering occurs when a residential customer, commercial customer, small commercial, puts in renewable generation behind the meter. And as you go through the day or through the month, the energy can flow both directions. So we basically set up a meter that can measure two independent registers, measures energy going in and energy going out as you go through the month. Distributed generation is basically a larger version of that, where they're typically over generating quite a bit, pushing a lot of energy out onto the grid. By design, net metered customers are supposed to produce a portion of their requirements, not supposed to be a net producer over a period of time. JEA has demonstrated significant and innovative leadership in the area of clean energy and renewables for really approaching 2 decades. This timeline goes back to 1999. We were early adopters in Duval County, putting in more than 25 locations, fairly small PV panels early on at a variety of locations. Our board, back in 2004, approved a Clean Power Program Action Plan that sought a goal to put in 7.5% clean power capacity by 2015. By 2015, we had doubled the goal, so we achieved 15% on that program. Our net metering program started in 2009, and we put in a long-term purchase power agreement for a 12-megawatt solar farm out on the west side off of 301. At that time, that was the largest solar PV installation in the state of Florida. Fast forward to 2017. We are in the process this year, we've been working on this for about 2 years, of expanding our universal solar, utility scale solar from that initial 15-megawatt project. We're adding about 35 to get up to close to 50 total. So that's underway. I mentioned earlier we launched the Solar Smart program earlier this year, and we were recognized in a significant industry magazine, T&D World, for our leadership in integrating distributed generation into the grid cleanly. Quite a bit of a change in our industry, the energy landscape. The pace of evolution of energy supply is increasing. I think everybody's familiar with the amazing shale gas revolution. Has dropped, increased supply and dropped prices drastically. Technology has driven the price of renewables down, wind, but in particular solar PV. And over the last few years, JEA and others in the industry have moved away from carbon-intense generation, not because we're forced to by regulations out of Washington, but just natural market forces and economies. We're continuing to see fundamental transformation, unprecedented in my 30-plus years with JEA and in the business. Technology, in addition to the natural gas prices and the lower renewable energy prices we talked about, significant advances in the last few years in battery storage technology and efficiency and quality, and just significant, amazing improvements in energy efficiency and demand side management, so customer side of the meter. Changes in customer behavior. A lot of our customers more and more every day want to reduce their carbon footprint, embracing energy efficiency and other things. And then on the regulatory front, particularly greenhouse gases and CO2 remains very questionable. We think the long-term trend in our business is to continue to move, have regulations continue to move the industry away from high carbon intense production, but there's certainly a lot of uncertainty as to when that might occur. This is a significant chart over about 9 years, 2009 to 2016. Significant reduction, the orange line, in the price of PV panels, going from around $7.50 to $1.50. So that's and it's interesting that started in 2009, which is when our net metering program went in place. So back in 2009, the price of a panel was $7.50 per kW. And then the blue bar charts show the increase in installed megawatts, doubling from 15 to 16. And this is a national chart, U.S. When we look at all the different ways you can make electricity, and this is unsubsidized, levelized cost of energy, a bit of a mouthful, the lowest cost options on the table are solar PV, large utility scale, down around $50, and wind, also in that $40 to $50 range. The lowest cost for traditional units is on the bottom, which is natural gas combined cycle in the $70 range, 60 to 70 range. So an example of that is JEA's Brandy Branch combined cycle unit. And then a little more expensive than that is coal. But the lowest unsubsidized, again, is solar PV and wind. This is a similar chart to the one we had up a minute ago. It shows the significant reduction with a forecast into the future, 2020 to 2030, of both the cost of residential solar panels and lithium-ion batteries. Phenomenal decrease in cost, and it's bringing about a huge shift for us in our business. So today at the board meeting, we are proposing, and I mentioned about 5 things that we'll be looking for discussion and approval on. We're proposing a substantial increase in solar generation. We're currently Once we get through this calendar year, we'll be at about 50 megawatts, 45 installed capacity. This does not count private. This is JEA utility scale. We're proposing to add up to 250 megawatts of additional solar. Will reduce exposure to higher fossil fuel prices, particularly natural gas, and save our customers money. We think, based on a report we saw back in 2016, Shining Cities report, this will put Jacksonville on the path to being the largest solar community in the country in terms of installed kW per capita. So that's where 250 takes us. I've got a couple slides left as we talk about the additional. So we're expanding solar. I mentioned earlier we have a energy mix policy. It was signed by the board via resolution in 2010. It called for 30% of our annual energy requirements to come from nuclear by 2030. Back then, nuclear was viable, and it was a good way to get base load, zero emission, zero carbon. And at that point, solar and wind were still much more expensive as alternatives. Given where we've evolved today, our proposed change is to swap out the word nuclear and replace it with carbon neutral. So it doesn't necessarily take nuclear off the table, although that doesn't look particularly likely at this point. It basically subs in solar and wind and landfill gas and biomass and some other renewable type options. So that's our proposal. That's one of the items on the agenda for today. I mentioned our universal solar expansion. This shows the current JEA. These are all PPAs, 20, 30 years. We've got 3 in service today, 6 are under construction, and they'll be under construction, should be commercial by the end of the year. And then the yellow call-out boxes with the red typing are 4 new, larger 50 megawatt sites that that is the real expansion. This is 4 times 50 is 200. We're looking for a 5th piece of property to put another 50 megawatts in, but that's what we have right now. Before the board meeting, we'll have a rate hearing. There's a water sewer matter, and we're asking for approval of this new SolarMax offering. We launched the Solar Smart last year. Currently, 56 JEA customers are participating, 1/3 of whom have signed up for 100% of their energy use. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, this is targeting larger commercial industrial companies who will basically piggyback our new our PPAs. So they'll be able to co-participate with JEA alongside us with the new PPAs. And I'm going to turn things over to Jay Worley, current incentives.
Excuse me, Jay, as you go through for Ms. Kessler on the phone, just if we can name the number on the slide that you're referring to in your remarks, it'd be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
50.
Yeah, slide 16. My name is Jay Worley. I'm with Worley & Associates, and I want to thank JEA and the board for allowing me to assist in this presentation. I'm going to go over the current incentives. I'm going to give a little background, a short tutorial, and also we'll go into the stakeholders' recommendation that was developed through some stakeholder meetings. At the recommendation of the board in 2016, it was requested to offer opportunities to stakeholders to provide input and information as a recommendation to the board for the development of a solar policy that will address the net metering's current policy that has a 10 megawatt limit in it. A little background, like Mike was saying, the net metering program commenced in 2009, has a 10 megawatt subscription limit. Through the maturation of the JEA net metering program, which is now going to be probably reaching 10 megawatts in January, as well as the maturation, as Mike was talking about, of the solar economics that are associated. JEA presented to the board in the form of a solar and demand workshop in April 2016. And again, that was presented for that program in the April 2016 board meeting. Based on stakeholder input, the board's review, and also, if you remember, the amendment called the Florida Solar Energy Subsidies and Personal Solar Use Initiative which at that time was called Amendment 1, that was going to the ballot, a state constitutional amendment, the ballot in November. It was recommended to defer action until after that amendment vote. Of course, since it's a state constitutional amendment, you have to have 60% supermajority. It did not reach the 60% supermajority. Therefore, at the time, the board had requested to go on and provide opportunities for stakeholder meetings to look at the policy when it was approaching 10 megawatts. I had the opportunity to moderate a series of 4 stakeholder meetings. It's conducted in the spring of 2017. The first really was a low-income advocacy information meeting, and the following 3 were the stakeholder meetings themselves. It was very well attended, and with that, there was valuable input that developed the recommendation from the stakeholders. Just to give you a little thumbnail on how solar works, if you notice, this is page 18. If you notice, rooftop solar panel array converts sun energy into electricity and supplies energy needs during sunny hours. Of course, if there's no batteries involved, then that consumption goes into the house. If it's clouds like today, you have a minimal amount of solar radiation, which you have less energy that's produced. And at that point in time, of course, you're going to have to take energy from the grid, which JEA produces. On a sunny day, when there's, of course, energy is produced and the household consumes more than is needed, then there's opportunities there for that household or the consumer to send electricity back on the grid to JEA. And that was the basis for the net metering program. Next slide on 19. As Mike was saying earlier, how this really works is JEA at this point in time does not have any type of recordation or anything as far as what that rooftop solar is producing at that individual's entity. What happens is there's a 2-register meter that's located on the house. If the individual or the house is not having that much of a consumption, the electricity flows into that house on 1 register. In those real sunny days where there's more consumption, more energy produced than what's being consumed by that individual consumer, that energy goes back to JEA, and right now it's retail to retail. Next slide on page 20, just to give you a good indication of what we consider these peak time. And if you notice, it says winter peak hours. JEA, of course, is still a winter peaker. That blue left elevated area is the morning peak, and it's usually around 7 a.m. People getting ready, going to work, going to school. The right side of the slide that shows the afternoon peak, those are usually between 4 and 6 when people are getting home. And so what happens is usually the solar peak is usually around 1:30 in the afternoon. And so what you're seeing is the peak time for solar being during the off times that you're seeing for the morning peak or the afternoon peak that people have consumption requirements from JEA. And you see that little thing that says charge battery bank, if the individuals do have batteries for their solar systems, that entity can then have that storage, that battery store that energy and utilize during those on-peak times. Slide 21. Once again, it's the 10 megawatt policy limit. It appears that based on the subscription rate that we have at JEA, if you notice that left bottom figure, 2009, of course, when the subscription was commenced, you had a higher cost as far as from a solar standpoint, but also you had JEA incentives and you had also federal and state incentives associated with that. As the cost started going down and the traction became apparent within the JEA territory, the subscription rate increased, and at this point in time, we're about 8.6 megawatts at JEA, and based on the adoption rate, it does appear like in January, the 10 megawatt cap will be reached. The annualized expense for a current 8.6 megawatt system of installed private solar is approximately $794,000 annually. The table on the below right reflects the current and future expense levels, and Steve Mackinac will be talking about that further. So when you start looking at the background and the subscription rate and where we are today with the policy, the catalyst for having the stakeholder meetings and the recommendations that came out of those meetings, the one recommendation, when I read it out loud, it looks like multiple, but it is one recommendation in one. It had extend the current Tier 1 and Tier 2 10 megawatt cap to 25 megawatts in order to allow JEA to review related ideas, policies, and technical opportunities, review research the financial impact on customers as a whole, evaluate, address grandfathering of existing net metering solar customers, review a process for a methodical step-down plan for the retail rate, and evaluate allocating a portion of the incentive to a reinvestment fund dedicated to such programs as battery storage, utility-scale renewables, and other technologies and efficiencies. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Steve Mackinac.
Okay, thank you, Jay. So, can I have the thing too?
You bet.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Page 23.
Yes, we're on page 23 now. So, we're approaching the 10 megawatt cap, and really our goal now is to replicate the success that we've had with net metering with a new program, while continuing net metering with the revised rules, and that's where the battery incentive program comes in. So I think it's really helpful to look at this as a battery incentive program, and the changes to the net metering distributed generation policy support that battery incentive. Moving to page 25 now. So with our large-scale solar, with the expansion of the universal-sized solar systems, we're seeing solar at an equivalency with fossil fuels. Once we have power purchase agreements with at our fuel rate or below our fuel rate, now we're getting solar energy for the same price as we're producing fossil energy. That's huge. The industry's been waiting for that for years. It's been promised to be on the horizon, and we finally made it to the horizon. So with that, really the next horizon is battery storage, and we see the implementing a battery program is helping to drive battery prices down, incorporating batteries on our grid at a fraction of the cost for the utility, and using the batteries to still help preserve the value of rooftop solar for our customers. Next, page 26. So some details on the battery incentive program. It would be effective February 1st, 2018, and provide an incentive for customers to purchase a home battery system. JEA would offer a 30% rebate on the purchase and installation price of the battery system, up to a maximum of $2,000, and we're budgeting $1 million a year for rebates. At an average solar system size of 8 kilowatts, that translates to about 500 customers a year, and that's about our current adoption rate. These systems would still be eligible for a 30% federal tax credit, which gets applied to the 70% that we haven't paid. So from a customer point of view, half of the cost of the battery is being borne by either JEA or the federal tax incentive. And it's important to note, we really want this program to be successful. So what the batteries cost is, we've heard some reports that the batteries are higher than we're estimating right now, and part of the problem with that is right now there is no demand. As JEA pointed out back on slide 19, right now we're a free battery. The customers get all the benefits of having a battery without having to buy a battery, so there's no reason to go buy a battery. From seeing the interconnection requests, we've had about 3 batteries put on the system over the lifetime of net metering. That's not exactly a mature market. This will quickly, by creating a market of 500 people putting in home batteries, establish a marketplace where the prices are coming down to meet the demand. So the other part of the incentive program relates to the distributed generation policy, which takes our existing distributed generation policy, which was for more commercial, merges it with a net metering policy, so we're simplifying our policies. And a couple of important points here. We would continue with the current net metering policy up until January 31st, 2018. All existing customers that have systems installed by that time would be grandfathered for a period of 20 years. So that takes them through February 1st, 2038. One of the feedback we've gotten from stakeholders on our proposal is related to the timing and how rapidly it's happening. And part of the reason for that is by doing it now, when we have about 1,100 net metering customers, we can afford to be what I think everybody agrees is very generous with the grandfathering policy. If we had a lot more customers in the program, we wouldn't be able to afford to have that level of grandfathering, and then that would be a serious issue for customers who had already made that commitment. So we think that's a very important element and kind of forces us to move quickly. We're removing the limits on how many megawatts are installed, because when the system has a battery, really, we don't need to limit it. There's in theory, nothing coming back to us. Now, there's going to be a little bit as batteries are full on a sunny day and low usage, or maybe a mismatched system, but it'll be very minimal compared to what we have now. And the excess energy would come back to us at the wholesale fuel rate. And that's another, what's been identified as a big issue, but that is an integral part of the proposal. If we continue to offer full retail, we're still a free battery. There's no incentive to put in a battery, no matter what size rebate we give. By reducing our payback rate to the fuel rate, that creates a substantial incentive, because now the way the system works for the customers is to not send any power back to us. If whatever they keep and store on their own battery system and then use themselves is offsetting consumption that would be at full retail, so they essentially get full retail for that without us providing the backup. Okay, the next slide, page 28, just goes through some details. This was sort of our bogey that we put out there. It's an 8 kilowatt solar system with, that's about our average size of installation that we see these days. So that customer has about a $1,700 energy bill, $350 or so, actually would come to us, and the other part is netted out because it's being supplied by their rooftop solar. If we just went to the proposed policy, that would move about $500 from savings over to the bill. That's kind of excessive. So by putting in the battery program, that restores the value back to the customer for what they're getting from the rooftop solar. It changes what's about a $40 a month impact to about 50 cents a month. And on the utility side, going back to that table that the JEA, not JEA, but Jay referred to, as far as what it costs the utility for net metering. So it takes a 20-year total of that of $2 million per megawatt, almost $2 million, and reduces it to $250,000. So we're seeing a substantial decrease in what it costs JEA to support this program. So really, the phrase that kept coming up as we kind of talk to various stakeholders is this. In a lot of ways, this is a win-win for both the customers and JEA. And of course, reducing those costs helps keep the costs low for everybody. Even so, the non-solar people also see a decrease in their impact. And we're almost at the end, so We really see this set of policies, and they really are meant to be looked at together, as moving us from the then section of here, we're on slide 29 now, more towards the near future, where batteries are part of our grid. Solar is being incorporated at ever higher levels, and leading us to a much brighter and cleaner future. Slide 30, just to recap the benefits. This is an innovative program. There's some early adopters. I think Honolulu and California has a very different type of battery incentive program. But as far as domestic municipal utilities, we would be near the first. So we expect to be a role model for this, and certainly hope to be able to encourage others, because the more people who do this, the more the nationwide battery market is going to grow, and we're going to see that same price trend that we saw in solar follow batteries. It builds on and complements our existing offerings, and very importantly, preserves customer choice. The customers are still incentivized to put up solar. They're now doubly incentivized to put in storage. We think this program is attractive enough that we're allowing existing net metering customers, if they want the battery incentive, they can opt in, so opt out of net metering and collect the battery rebate and install a battery on their system. And it really does reflect the input of the stakeholders. One of the things they asked us to be was innovative and creative in our approach, and we may have gone a little beyond that, but we really tried to think outside the box and come up with a solution that is really resilient on its own too. With this program in place, with limits gone, we really kind of eliminate. I hate to say we won't have to come back again with a solar policy, but there wouldn't be any foreseeable need for revisions to this. All right, and then just to quick recap what we've talked about, and how you're going to see this during the board meeting. So the first item is going to be the separate rate hearing for SolarMax, and Paul and I were excited because we thought it was Solar MCS, but then they told me no, it's MAX. So still excited, but a little tempered. And then in the regular board meeting, the energy mix policy that Mike discussed, as well as the solar expansion and land acquisition and the panels along the window over there, so for the properties that we're looking at. And the solar would take up a fraction of the land on those, so don't think that we're tying up that much land. You can use the the existing 12 megawatts on our West Jacksonville, out near Brandy Branch, is on one of the panels. That kind of gives you a sense of scale, at least on that panel, what 50 might look like. And then, of course, the final item to vote on would be the distributed generation policy that we just finished discussing. And that was slide 31, and that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Steve, Jay, and Mike. Really appreciate that. Paul, before we open it up for board discussion, anything to add?
Well, this has been a long process, and rightfully so. We have incorporated the best thinking in the industry. Our team at JEA has many, many years of experience in terms of just the electric industry, as well as solar, as well as other alternative generating technologies. So we've been abreast of this and watched this closely. We're involved with the American Public Power Association, as well as a number of other trade organizations, AEIC, Associated Illuminating Edison Companies, which is a technical national firm that follows these technical issues, and we're involved with that. So we've got hundreds of years of experience, both in terms of just understanding the flows, understanding our customers, understanding the demands and the flows of the system. It was really unique. We sort of brushed over it a little bit, but nationally recognized in T&D world for the integration of renewables into the grid. That was a big deal for us in terms of at least demonstrating nationally that JEA, the engineers and those that have focused on solar and the integration of this energy into our grid in a cost-effective way recognized with a national award. I think it meets the punch list on both sides. It's balanced on both sides in terms of the recommendations. No one side is getting everything. We've sort of tried to meet in the middle here after sort of at least a year and a half of this most recent go-round in discussion with stakeholders, as well as continuing to employ various trade and industry focus. I think the key in terms of universal solar, and somebody, whether it's Mike or Steve, mentioned that the price points here are so attractive, have finally, and really the big turning point here, has reached where solar, through a purchase power arrangement on a large scale, universal scale, has reached our fuel cost. And so we look at it purely as energy, not as capacity, but it's quite frankly, we can buy natural gas or we can buy solar energy, and it's the same cost for our customers. And quite frankly, we just didn't think that was going to be here as soon as it has emerged. And it's been certainly brought on by investments in net metering, in terms of investments by our government, by the scaling up of manufacturing panels across the globe. But the price points truly are here, and this is the first big step for the community. We made the decision to support this in terms of owning the land. These will be 20, 25-year, maybe 30-year levelized costs. So when we look at this, it's $32.50 a megawatt hour for the entire term of the contract. And at the end of that term, we own the land. So we can either refit the land with new solar panels, or we still have that for conservation, et cetera. And I think it's a great utilization of our ratepayers' money, as well as being a cost-effective, cleaner, greener energy into our portfolio.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to open it up to the board for discussion. I have some specific questions. I'm sure the other members of the board do as well. But I'd just like to start by thanking Jay, Mike, Steve, Paul, your entire team for the effort that's gone into this. I know it's been a long haul, but you're right. It deserves and merits that level of attention, investigation, and inquiry. I think you've gotten to the right result here. I do have some specific questions, but in general, I support the recommendations of staff, and I'll explain my position first. I am a firm believer in incentives. I think consumers respond to incentives. I think that a lot of the growth that we've experienced nationally and within the JEA customer base for net metering, or growth in our solar community as a result of the net metering. I think that subsidy was and that's what it was. It was a subsidy. We were paying the solar customers back at more than our fuel cost to support the growth in the solar industry. And that was the right thing to do. I believe that. But now, as Paul points out, we've reached price parity in the fuel mix. I don't believe that those subsidies are appropriate anymore. That's just my personal opinion. And if you told solar customers that we want to charge you more so we can charge a coal customer less, I think they would object. So just wear the other shoe for a minute and think about that. I know there's some in the audience that are proponents of continuing a generous net metering rate. I just don't believe that it's appropriate at this time. And I say that taking into consideration the other factors that a lot of solar supporters point out. Non-economic factors, future RECs, health benefits. So I understand that, but those same arguments could apply to other sources in our fuel as well. I think that the battery incentive program is the right complement to adjusting our net metering policy here in support of a new distributed generation policy. I believe that the reality is that only with a combination of battery incentive can we get to where we need to be in right sizing and right pricing our transmission and distributed generation assets. We can't continue in the future to build a system for peak demand without taking those factors into account. And that's something that I know staff is going to be looking at in the future so that we can right-size our assets and right-price them to reduce the capacity for peak demand. And that requires that those people generating their electricity have an ability to store it. So I think a battery incentive is the right way to go there. And I think just as we saw with the growth in the solar PV industry, as prices came down, we'll see the same thing happen with the growth in the private battery industry as those prices come down. So I want to thank Paul and his staff for all the work they've put into this policy. I think it's the right policy. I think it creates the incentives that our consumers and ratepayers will respond to. And with that, I'll open it up for questions. Ms. Spelman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for the presentation, gentlemen. That was very well done. I agree with the chairman. I think the time is now, and I think it's appropriate that this board take positive action on this recommendation. There's one thing that bothers me, though. I really don't understand why we have a 20-year grandfather clause in this agreement. It's not going to cause me to vote no, but can somebody tell me what I'm missing here? It just doesn't seem fair to me, and I think that otherwise the agreement is fair.
I think it was part of the compromise in working through dialogue with the stakeholder group over the last year and a half. I would argue that from a return on investment, they didn't buy their systems typically yesterday. They bought them in the past, so they didn't. They bought it with an understanding that they would have a payback in a certain amount of time. So we felt like going ahead and letting them continue to be on it for 20 years. It's a known cost and a quantified cost, and I guess it's just part of the. What I would offer is where we settled with just negotiating with the stakeholders.
Getting them the benefit of the bargain that they thought they were getting when they invested in that much more expensive capital asset.
Back then.
Right. Even though there was no tacit, no contractual obligation for a rate, there may have been a tacit understanding.
They made their decision in good faith based on the rules in place at the time, but no, there was no contractual obligation. Just we're trying to be fair and balanced and meet everybody halfway. We're looking for win-win. It's a small number of customers and a fairly small amount of dollars over the long haul. The current customers have the option of jumping onto the new deal with the battery, by the way, and we're hoping that some of them will consider getting off the old rate earlier than 20 years and opting to get the battery incentive.
What does that do to the? How does that impact the relationship?
Well, it just flips them to the new policy.
So they don't have a grandfathered rate?
They didn't be, yeah.
They start with a new deal?
Right.
Yes, they'd start with a new deal.
But they can pocket $2,000 credit towards a battery right away.
Right.
Well, I'm happy that we're moving forward. Thank you.
That's stupid. Thank you.
Reverend Newbill.
Yeah, my question was, you said the regular customer will be able to do the battery. So where is the incentive for me as a customer to get battery when I'm on the regular electricity?
No, the battery rebate would only be for people installing some form of renewable energy. So I apologize if that wasn't
Okay, I thought I
communicated.
heard that. Okay.
No, it does require a renewable backup, and that's the same rule that the federal tax incentive carries, where to qualify for that, you need to have actually charge the battery from a renewable source.
Yeah, well, that was my understanding. Well, you asked the other question, so I'm satisfied with that.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Ms. Kessler.
No questions. I agree with your analysis, Mr. Howard.
Thank you. Ms. Flanagan.
Thank you for the presentation, very, very educational. We talked about the timeline with which the policy changes would come into effect. Just out of curiosity, for the planned acquisition sites, what would the timeline of acquiring installation and getting them up and going be?
We're currently negotiating with property owners. We've identified 4 sites. 2 of them we actually own. They were bought back around 2000 during the Delaney administration
Preservation.
preservation project. So we're going to use 2 of those, and then we're under LOI and negotiations with 2 other property owners. We're seeking a 3rd one, so we would move pretty quickly on the property. We're going to put an RFQ on the street and an RFP and go through a process. It would probably be middle of 18 before we get going.
Yeah.
And we're thinking, there'll be commercials sometime in the 2019 timeframe. We want to time it so we're hitting the market right. We think at this point, there's a lot of people out there doing these projects, and the price, supply and demand, the price of the panels have gone up short term. So we don't want to jump in too soon. We want to wait until the timing is right.
Don't want to wait too long either.
No,
True.
No.
lose the window.
Mr. Gross, what, under the proposed this new distributed generation policy, what is the assumed avoided cost for the analysis in the presentation today? Do you know what we were assuming? So I'm looking specifically at those slides, trying to get to it, where we had the cost savings on the customer bill, 28. Do you know what we assumed as the avoided cost? Or Steve, who's got that?
Yeah.
As far as the,
Yeah, the net metering adjustment, so down from the current retail.
right. So, under the current policy, we're reimbursing at the full retail rate. So so this sample bill indicates that there's still some purchase from the grid. And then under the new policy with reimbursement at the fuel rate, without a battery, is that middle section. So, so that's the 3 1/4 cents reimbursement rate.
Okay, 3 1/4. Under the proposed distributed generation policy, obviously our fuel rate changes from time to time. When would it change for the customer, the net metering customer?
It would float with the fuel rate.
Okay, so on a monthly basis, it'll float.
Well, hopefully we don't change the fuel rate that often.
I hope not, but whenever.
It'll float when the,
Yes.
when the board approved rate changes.
Okay.
Follows the fuel rate,
Okay.
up and down, up and down.
Can you go back to the slide with the locations of the projects and just, we had 3 different, it's 20,
Page 13.
13. There's 3 different types of sites indicated there. One in the yellow highlight, one with green print, one with black print.
Yes.
Can you just give me a little verbal key to what those sites are?
Yeah, the green print are active and in service. So over on the left, Jack Solar, that's the one that went in place in 2009. Old Plank Road just went in last week. And Montgomery Solar up at the top there is green. It's in service. It's northeast of JEA. The black print are the projects we're putting in this calendar year. So an additional 20 megawatts. The yellow background and red print are for the 4 new 50 megawatt plants. So we're dealing with a combination of a plant that's been in place since 2009, the ones that Steve and his team added this year, about 34 megawatts worth, and then the 4 new ones that are what we're labeling solar expansion.
Okay.
So incrementally, it's the 200 megawatts shown here, and we're actually talking about an additional 50 megawatts. So we're talking 250 megawatts on top of 50, essentially taking us to 300.
And did I hear you correctly that if fully implemented, that would put JEA at the greatest number of solar megawatts per capita of any utility in the country?
Yes. That assumes everybody else, it's a trajectory, so it makes some assumptions about the movement in other communities. There's a lot of growth in solar around the country. But we were ranked last year in the top 20 cities in the country for solar installed KW per capita. We're in the top 20 nationwide.
And just to finish off Ms. Flanagan's question, if you proceeded with current plans and timelines on these 4, when would all 4 be in service?
2019,
That quickly?
yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, late 2019.
These are quick projects,
Okay. So 18 to 20 months, something like that?
Yeah.
yes.
That's fantastic.
Mr.
Well,
Chairman,
Mr. Pepper,
one more question. I'm not an expert on this, Mike, but I did own a hybrid car one time.
No longer,
One time I owned one, but what I learned was that batteries batteries are the key to success. And I'm just shocked at all this talk about batteries all of a sudden. I guess I missed the meeting when we decided we had a battery technology that was gonna preserve all this energy that's produced by solar. Have we made some quantum leap, have not we, but have quantum leaps been made on the batteries? And
Yes.
the batteries you see going to Puerto Rico, I mean, that's all seems new to me.
It's all new and cutting edge, absolutely, in the last 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years?
Yeah.
Okay,
So, and it still has a limited life, 10 to 15 years. It still has limited cycling and whatnot, in terms of what you can do with it. And it's expensive still. It's not, it hasn't
so the
gotten to the
expense part
point.
of it's still an issue.
Right.
Okay, okay.
But the technology has advanced quite a bit. You think about the lead-acid battery in your
Right,
vehicle versus
right.
the technology, lithium-ion and other technologies. Of course, we have a SAFT here in town making batteries and
Right.
doing some cutting-edge work. And then you've got Elon Musk and the
Tesla
Yeah.
Powerwall. Yeah.
yeah.
Good.
So it's
Thank you.
growing, yeah.
Yeah, just like I said in my remarks a moment ago, if you look at 7, that orange line that shows the price falling, I think the same thing's happening with the batteries now. Their capabilities are increasing, and it's like there's a Moore's law for this stuff, you know, it's incredible the pace of improvement. Anything else, Reverend Newbill? Ms. Kessler?
No, sir.
Ms. Flanagan? Well, we're right at an hour. I'd just like to tell all the people who've been so attentive in the audience, this is a workshop where the board gets to discuss with staff their proposals and recommendations. We're not going to take a vote in the workshop. There are action items for the board when we convene our board meeting. We've got a public hearing to commence the board meeting where we'll talk about the SolarMax tariff change. We didn't even really get into that, but it's another key component of JEA's overall solar plan and policy. So you're invited to stick around for the board meeting. We're going to take a brief recess, 5 minutes between now and the kickoff of the board meeting, and there will be a public comment period both during the public hearing and the full board meeting. So that will conclude the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I get a gavel. You gotta get a gavel. Stand.
Yeah, where we at?
Okay, the October 2017 meeting of JEA Board of Directors will come to order. I ask everyone to stand for a time of reflection and pledge to the flag. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We've had an agenda that's been published in accordance with Florida sunshine laws and circulated. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Second from Mr. Petway. All in favor?
Aye.
Also like to note for the record that we're joined by Board Member Dolores Kessler by phone. You still with us, Ms. Kessler?
Yes, sir, I am here.
Thank you. Let's see, safety briefing, Mr. McElroy.
We start each meeting with a safety briefing at JEA. In the event that we need to call security or 911, Mr. Hobson will take care of that. Lieutenant's in the audience. If CPR is required to be administered, Mike Brost will lead that. He's trained in CPR. In the event we must evacuate the room, we will go down the stairwell to the left of the elevators, and we will gather on the southeast corner of Church and Main Street. I would ask everybody to be familiar with the person to your left and right, and assure that we exit, and you exit together as a group, and we get everybody out of the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. Turn to our Chief Legal Officer, Ms. Brooks, for our sunshine law statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This meeting and the public hearing has been duly noticed as a public meeting. Quorum is present in the room. Minutes will be taken, all in compliance with the sunshine laws.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. So as noted a moment ago, the first item on the agenda is actually a public hearing. So before the board meeting, we'll have a public hearing on 2 tariff matters, the SolarMax This is not the distributed generation policy. This is a SolarMax rate for large commercial customers of JEA, and a amendment to the tariff for leachate treatment with the city of Jacksonville. So for that public hearing, I'll turn it to Ms. Dykes, our CFO. If there are any members of the public that have comments on those two items for the public hearing, SolarMax and the leachate tariff, please take the seats up front. I don't have any cards, but there are seats reserved for you up front. Ms. Dykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I am behind tab 2B this afternoon for the presentation, which is just a summary of the modification to the tariffs that are proposed at the meeting today. Behind tab 3A is the actual tariff documents themselves. So there's a red line copy of the electric system tariff and the water and sewer system tariff that show the proposed changes associated with these tariff changes today. Working from the summary document, we are proposing to make modifications to both tariffs at the hearing this morning. The first is a modification to the electric system tariff, which is the introduction of the JEA SolarMax rider. As was described in the workshop presentation, this rider is an opportunity for very large commercial customers to participate with JEA on universal solar projects in a very meaningful way. So these customers have to be taking at least 7 million kilowatt hours of electricity each year. So they're very substantial, large commercial customers. And they would sign up with JEA for either 5 or 10 years at their option, and they would participate in a specific project. So the benefit for those customers is to be able to participate from a co-branding perspective, to be able to point to a specific location that they would be participating in, and to get that guaranteed price associated with that specific development for either 5 or 10 years, again, at their option. This is available to commercial customers. I did want to just point out, there's a letter at your seat that was provided by one of our large commercial customers who unfortunately wasn't able to be here today. But I wanted to share with you some of their thoughts on this rider, and it's the letter that's got the Amazon heading on the top of it. Amazon provided this letter to provide their feedback on the proposed tariff after they had a chance to review it. Amazon's a signatory to the Corporate Renewable Energy Buyers Principles, which is signed up for by 65 large companies around the world, and was developed by the World Resources Institute and the World Wildlife Fund. And it was specifically developed to advance and increase access to renewable energy for large companies. As part of those principles, they outline specifically that they work with local utilities to provide better access and expanded access to renewable energy when that makes the most sense. And they, in this letter, have talked about this being a great opportunity for them to have done that. So I appreciate them sending it, and they did ask that I share that with you as part of this presentation this morning. Mr. Chairman, would you like me to pause for questions on the electric tariff, or just go right into the water and sewer tariff document?
That's a great idea. Let's pause. Mr. Petway, any questions on the SolarMax electric tariff?
No questions, just maybe an observation. This Amazon thing is not untypical. We do this relationship building for prospects and others coming to town, right? Big customers, and
That's correct, yeah. As
we
part of
work
our
with the chamber and we have incentives, yeah.
As part of our economic development efforts, we do work with the economic development stakeholders locally to work with large companies that are either considering locating here or who
Right.
have already made the decision to locate here, and to come up with offerings that work best for them.
Right. And I'm very proud of that, Mr. Chairman. I think that's a good thing for you to be
Thank you,
doing.
Mr. Petway. Reverend Newbill, any questions on the SolarMax tariff? Ms. Kessler?
No, none here.
Ms. Flanagan? One quick question. About how many customers in our service territory do we estimate would be eligible for this tariff?
It's a good question, and frankly, only a few because of the size requirement. So far, we have indications of interest from 2, and it'll be available, obviously, to anybody who meets the size requirements.
Now or in the future?
Now we're in the future.
Okay, thank you. If you'll continue regarding the Leachate tariff.
Thank you. Flipping to the next page, the tariff modification in the water and sewer system We talked about at the August 2017 board meeting when we originally asked for the call for the rate hearing. This is a modification to the tariff that under which we treat leachate from landfills in the city of Jacksonville. That leachate is brought to the Buckman wastewater treatment facility, and it's a modification to the tariff that would bring the charge that we assess for treatment of leachate up to covering our marginal cost associated with treatment. So this is step one of two steps in terms of a tariff adjustment. It was identified by our rate consultant as being a significant area of under collection, and so this helps to correct that and bring our rates in line with our costs to provide this service. The first step would be to increase the cost of treatment to $5.16 per 100 gallons. Again, that covers just the marginal cost of treatment. What we're going to be doing in parallel to this is working at the Buckman wastewater treatment facility to identify the best capital solution going forward for treatment of wastewater at that facility. It will either be a UV system or a hypochlorite system or perhaps some combination of the two. Once we've made that determination in terms of the capital investments needed at Buckman, then we'll be coming back to the board to recommend a full cost recovery rate for leachate treatment.
So this is an interim step, really.
This is an interim step, that's correct.
Any questions for Ms. Dykes regarding the proposed change to the leachate tariff? Ms. Kessler?
None here.
Ms. Flannery? Okay. I have seen no speakers come forward on the SolarMax or the SolarMax and Leachate. If you'll stand and give us your name and address. I don't have a card for you, do I?
No, sir, I was going to speak at the next one.
Okay.
My name is Dave Bruderly. I am a hopefully soon-to-be retired professional engineer with 40 years' experience in this business. I'm wearing my Clean Cities t-shirt today, which is 20 years old, to remind you that the Energy Policy Act was passed in 1992, and a lot of the stuff that we're doing today, the market forces that are creating the incentives to do what you're doing today, were created by that legislation. And in spite of opposition by a number of special interest groups that have sought to, like, for example, Clean Cities, kill the beast by defunding the program to discourage the introduction of alternative fuel vehicles. Fortunately, the technology advances, and in spite of political opposition, good things happen because we are entrepreneurs and creative engineers and scientists know how to solve these problems. So I have a question. And I apologize for not having studied this in depth because I am trying to be retired, but how does this proposal impact folks like IKEA who are installing rooftop solar at their cost, as I understand it? And does this inhibit or encourage other large rooftop commercial buildings in this region, your service territory, Amazon and others like that, to either put in or not put in rooftop solar and also high efficiency distributed generation?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Bruderly.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Dykes, could you address the interaction with the proposed tariff to commercial customers' adoption of solar arrays?
Sure. This tariff is meant to provide greater customer choice. It doesn't do anything in terms of impacting a customer's ability to pursue rooftop solar, for example, under our existing or future distributed generation policies. This is just an additional option available to very large commercial customers to be able to incorporate renewable energy in a meaningful way into their portfolios.
So just like if I could, just like our smart solar for residential customers, if you live in a condo or an apartment and you don't have the ability to install a solar array under JEA Smart Solar, you can sign up to buy solar energy to meet your energy needs. Similarly, the commercial customer, without doing any installation, for whatever reason not able to do so or don't determine to do so, could instead elect to participate in our SolarMax and buy clean energy to support their operations.
That's a great parallel on many levels because the reality with many large commercial customers is that for whatever reason, they choose not to own the facilities that they occupy. And so for a large commercial customer that doesn't own a facility that chooses to lease it instead, this is a way for them to be able to incorporate renewables, much like the customer that lives in multifamily housing.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Dice. Mr. Bruderly, thank you for that question.
Yeah,
So-
Mr. Bruderly, if you wouldn't mind, if you would fill out a speaker card for a comment card for your comments made, just so we have it for the record.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. No other public speakers. That'll conclude our public hearing. The board will now move to action item 3A to vote on the SolarMax and Leachate tariff changes that have been discussed by Ms. Dykes. So I'll entertain a motion to adopt the resolution attached at 3A.
Move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Petway. That's a second from Ms. Kessler. I'll open the floor for any further discussion on these two tariff changes, SolarMax and Leachate tariff. Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of Resolution 2017-33, please so indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Dykes. Okay, we'll continue with our agenda. We're up to Roman numeral 4, and we will take comments from the public. I'll ask that, I'll call 3 names at a time, and I'll ask that you come and sit yourselves right here at the public seat. If you've got a card, I'll call your name, sit up here so we can reduce the time. Again, ask you to limit your comments to 2 minutes. Todd Arian, Scott Carr, Dave Bruderly. Again, we'll begin with Mr. Arian. Actually, Kevin Doyle, you can come up and take the empty seat.
I don't want to speak too loudly. First, I'd like to thank the Jacksonville Electric Authority, Board of Directors, stakeholders, and the JEA community.
I'm sorry, could you state your name and address, please?
Oh, my name's Todd Arian, and our representing Trojan Battery Company, and our corporate office is in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Great, thank you.
As I was saying, since 1925, our company has become the world leader in the manufacturing of deep cycle lead acid batteries. We have 4 manufacturing plants, including 2 that are located in California and 2 just north of the state border in Georgia. Our products are made in the USA. We strongly encourage and support the passage of JEA's Battery Incentive Program. Imagine going without electricity for a single day or even longer. And many of you don't have to imagine it, you probably just lived through it. Think about how integrated power has really become a major part of our daily lives. 10, 15 years ago, a household didn't require electricity to make a phone call. Today, we do, with the vast majority of us using cell phones. And it's not just about communication or convenience, it's about safety and health. From keeping food fresh in your refrigerator and freezers to providing air conditioning during intense heat waves. And at the same time, as an individual demand for electricity has increased, so has the population. This makes it increasingly difficult to quickly recover from large-scale catastrophic events, such as the recent hurricanes Irma, Harvey, and Maria. Centralized backup systems are often inefficient, difficult to scale and deploy. But if we distribute the backup systems at the household level, we can better serve our community in the face of these disasters. What do I mean by distributed backup systems for energy storage? Deploying residential battery-powered backup solutions at the customer level. Our residential energy backup storage solution provides approximately 5 to 8 days of autonomous household power, or longer based upon the individual household's usage of power, draw, and requirements. And we can provide continuous supply of electricity when our energy storage solution is hooked up to the solar arrays. Our systems are compact, roughly the size of a small cabinet, and are very cost effective. At present, we are targeting our entry-level price for a 5 kilowatt system with 2.5 kilowatt of continuous power at only $5,500, all inclusive, completely installed, panels, inverters, components. This energy and storage solution includes the batteries, the cabinet, all the controls components, solar panels, and the installation. They are easy to maintain with only periodic charging required, and the batteries are maintenance-free and designed to last 10 to 15 years, depending on their usage, obviously. They are safer than traditional gas-powered generators. They don't emit carbon monoxide, and one does not have to wait long at a gas station for hours on end to get gas to fuel their generators. Our energy storage solution can be tied directly into a household panel or operate as a standalone unit, and can be utilized not only to provide electricity during storms or wide-scale events, but also for usage during peak energy periods. At Trojan Battery, like JEA, we are stewards of our environment. We are a green company. Unlike our competitors, our traditional deep cycle batteries are 97% recyclable and are tried and proven with over 5 decades of experience.
Mr. Arian, can I ask you to wrap it up? Got a lot of comments.
No problem. 2 more lines. In addition to our battery pack replacement, the energy storage systems are minimal, beginning at only $700, depending on the usage requirements. In time, we look differently at how we provide power. It is definitely time that we look at how we provide power for all of our communities in the wake of recent events. And JEA is leading the way. We're proud to be working with the JEA community on providing an energy storage solution that can keep our community up and running, no matter what the Mother Nature may throw at us. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
I take it you're in favor of our battery incentive program.
Absolutely.
Mr. Carr. Is there Mr. Carr?
Yes.
Scott Carr? And if Mr. Doyle and Mr. Mosley can move to the front.
Hi, my name is Scott Carr. I am a mechanical engineer, graduate of the University of Florida, and I applaud JEA for your foresight in the use of batteries integrated into the grid. However, I'm in opposition to the feed-in rates as it is in conjunction with the solar program. So you were purchasing fuel from your solar parks at fuel rate. I believe it's $3.25 per megawatt hour. Solar has a capacity factor of 19%. If you add a battery, you get a capacity factor of 1. The benefit of which is if you have capacity factor distributed throughout the grid, you don't have to generate or you don't have to build another power plant. So what that means is your cost above fuel cost, meaning the additional 8 cents per kilowatt hour, you never have to spend because the consumer then will take care of the facility, whether it's the battery, the interconnection at the house. And so my issue is that you guys are trying to get something much cheaper than what the consumer is providing to you. And additionally, if you, the goals are to align the output of the solar panels with the needs of JEA. So with the purchase power agreement, they are south-facing panels. It is on a per kilowatt hour basis. They're going to peak around solar noon. JEA's peak in the summer months is around 3 to 5. What you can do is have a parallel program or just tie it into the existing rider that you install west-facing panels that peak around 3 to 5 so that it more closely aligns the needs of JEA with the wants of the consumer. Let's see, I believe it's Columbia Power and Light in Missouri. What they're doing is they're financially incentivizing consumers to install panels on the west with a $625 per kilowatt incentive. South is $500, east is $325. That way, instead of net metering, they get a direct capital incentive to install those panels to where it more closely aligns with the needs of the grid. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Carr, appreciate that. Next up, Mr. Doyle, and then it'll be Mr. Bruder.
Great. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to be here today, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Jay and Steve and the JEA team for doing a great job of managing the stakeholder process, which we were a part of. So appreciate their management of that process over the last few months. Consumer Energy Alliance, we're a U.S. consumer advocacy group that promotes affordable, all-the-above energy policy for small businesses, families, and consumers across the country. And of course, here based in Florida. And I'm based here in Jacksonville, so I'm a happy JEA customer, so thank you. We praise JEA for your forward-thinking proposals regarding solar energy. Consumer Energy Alliance supports solar energy and policies that are pro-solar, pro-grid, and pro-consumer. Increasing your solar footprint by 250 megawatts through universal utility-scale solar will help keep costs down while increasing your solar footprint by nearly tenfold. It equitably also helps disperse the cost across all customers, not just a chosen few. Regarding a proposal regarding SolarMax, allowing customers to voluntarily contribute to solar development, we are very supportive of such forward-thinking policies because it equitably also advances opportunities for solar. Regarding your battery technology, it has the potential to be a game changer in regards to future energy policy. And again, we commend JEA for being innovative with their approach at looking at and investing in new technologies. We believe that JEA is moving the needle in the right direction with all these new proposals, and we support 100%. Again, thank you for allowing me to be here, and also thank you as well for your work regarding Hurricane Irma and the storm recovery and what you're doing in Puerto Rico. So thank you. And as someone who had their power returned back on in 48 hours, super thank you. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Glad we could help. Mr. Mosley, then it'll be Mr. Bruderly, and I'll ask Sarah Boren and Dave Schachter to come up front. Mr. Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan Mosley, I represent the Chamber of Commerce. Jack's Alliance is a business unit within the chamber that focuses on energy, and Jacksonville is fast becoming a recognized kind of energy capital of the United States and really the world, with the things that are going on with natural gas in our maritime industry. And of course, the energy policies and what happens here at JEA are critical and important to that. I too was involved in the stakeholder meetings and really applaud what I think is, and I speak for the chamber, a very innovative, equitable response to the issue. This does put us on the map. Has the potential to really dampen our peaks and really benefit the entire rate base. And so from the Chamber of Commerce perspective, and as far as attracting new business, continuing to make Jacksonville a kind of a energy capital, that's a very good selling point as we go out and talk to businesses throughout the world. I think the yellow card means for me to terminate my remarks, and so I will yield to the yellow card.
Thank you, Mr. Mosley. Appreciate appreciate your support, the support of the Jacks Alliance and the Jacks Chamber. Thank you. Mr. Bruder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too want to commend staff for taking some very significant steps towards advancing the goal of local job creation and reducing our life cycle carbon emission footprint. But I do want to take one exception, and that is I don't think the battery versus net metering should be an either or. It should be an and. And I would strongly encourage you to delay any decision on reducing the net metering rate until you've had a lot more experience with seeing how the battery situation evolves, and until you've implemented the following recommendations that I'm about to give you. One, you as a board level, I believe, have a duty to ratepayers and to local elected officials and local business leaders to better explain why we're doing this. We have chaos in Washington today. We have presidents who deny pollution is a problem with climate change and other sources of mercury and others. The Clean Power Plan is under legal attack, I don't think it's technical attack based on everything I've seen. Frontline was just on last week explaining it's a legal argument. It's not a technical argument. So I would advocate that you guys adopt a policy or a goal to better explain to customers why you're doing this. And one would be to adopt a goal of maximizing local job creation and local community-wide economic benefits from the generation, distribution, and use of all forms of energy. That would include what Mr. Mosley talked about with our use of liquefied natural gas, for example, to power ships. But it would also include biofuels and everything else. And two, develop a goal to minimize community-wide life cycle carbon emissions, as the TPO is trying to do with the Clean Fuels Program in all forms of pollution, from the generation, distribution, and use of energy. This will help you explain to customers why you're doing this. But your staff is working, and this is critical, the staff's working under a huge handicap right now because of the uncertainty, the political uncertainty in Washington, and frankly even in Tallahassee, about the necessity, the public necessity for doing these types of programs. And since you've done this levelized cost analysis, I could see two more charts, one that says significant decline in life cycle carbon emissions for all these different energy pathways, and two would be the same thing for local job creation, not just local job, the guys that do the balance of systems, the rooftop construction and all that kind of stuff from solar, and put that into your decision process.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate those comments. Next, we hear from Sarah Borum. And if I could ask Dave Schachter, Pete Wilking, and George, can't read the last name, George.
Cavros.
Thank you. They can come up front. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, my name's Sarah Boren. I'm Director of Policy and Programs for U.S. Green Building Council, Florida, and my address is 388 8th Street, Atlantic Beach. So happy JEA customer, and thank you very much for all you did during Hurricane Irma. So first, I want to commend the staff. JEA staff has obviously worked very hard, and they did a great job in coming up with some innovative policies. We commend JEA overall in expanding your utility scale solar, offering SolarMax, and expanding, clean energy by 30% to by 2030. I'm up here to seek maybe refinement for your battery storage incentive program as well as your net metering. So on the battery storage incentive, I'm not saying I'm totally pro battery storage incentive. I think it's great. I just have some concerns about local pricing, actual local market research being put into the data. I made a bunch of calls on Friday, and I don't think that the pricing is quite right. And so I kind of want the staff to take a pause and maybe look at those a little bit. So the cost of batteries seems a little low. The local knowledge of how to install batteries and all the electrical work will add to that cost. So I think the knowledge is a little low. And I'm also a little bit concerned about this incentive programming actually shifting income brackets. It takes two Tesla batteries and 4 leaded acid batteries over the lifetime of a solar system. So that increases the cost. So I just want to make sure that we're not shifting solar, people being able to get a solar into 6-digit families. With Florida Sun, a local nonprofit, they are now reaching families of $45,000, and they're being able to put solar. So I just kind of want to look at that. So that's my thing on. And then the other aspect on the battery solar, I just read an article the other day about how Vermont is partnering with Tesla, and they're offering to pay off their battery by $15 a month. So there might be another way to provide entry into this program. Oh no, I got a red card already. Okay, and then net metering. My concern is that so rooftop adoption under net metering is already slowing in this region. It's still very low adoption rate, and the market penetration wasn't that high. I would love to see a tapering, not abrupt, drastic, but a tapering down as the cost of batteries come down. So complementing both of these programs so that both programs are very successful. And if the goal is a solar adoption rate, I think we can time this right. I think the staff has come up with some great tools. I just think we might be off a little bit. And then why rooftop solar? Having renewable energy distributed throughout, not just centrally distributed from JEA, is really important, and it makes a much more resilient system. So I create central command to single fuel, right? It's vulnerable. So I like that, Steve. So I like to see on-site renewable generation throughout so that we have a more resilient system. Finally, just my ask is past the 3 great utility kind of JEA controlled solar, maybe just delay a bit, get local market research in on the other 2, kind of fiddle with it, refine it, and then come out with a bang-up awesome program on both of those.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Appreciate that. Mr. Schachter. After that, we'll have Mr. Wilking, Mr. Chavros, and Greg Hankins.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is David Schachter, Terrawise Homes, Jacksonville, Florida, address 1334 Walnut Street. Just a quick little thing about our company. We're a home builder. We specialize in super energy efficient homes, and a big part of that is the solar. We are not a solar provider in that we don't just put solar on our roofs. If you bought solar panels from us, I couldn't go put them on your house next week, so I can't right my ship between now and February 1st. We have pre-sales, we have contracts that we've obligated ourselves to. We have about 36 homes that are sold, about 20 of them I can't deliver by February 1st. And I don't know what to tell those customers. And I don't know how to sell houses out tomorrow, because I really don't understand really how the batteries work or what they cost. But my biggest issue really is the speed that this has been brought to us. We had about 48 hours notice. We really haven't had a chance to really answer the things that you have been taught today. I would ask you to consider that the information you've gotten is from these slides. And these slides were produced by JEA. And every one of us in here has an interest of our own, and I would like you to consider that JEA has their own agenda, and that these numbers, they're not necessarily, they're not untrue, but they are definitely been crafted to to fit JEA's agenda. There are so many details that I could talk to you about, but I don't have time. None of us have time in 3-minute snippets to actually address and come to a full understanding of how this process should be and what is the right solution. My recommendation would be to have a true shareholder. I believe the shareholder thing was to get information from the community, but I don't think that the information that was on these slides and recommendation actually had input from us, the community. I think that you heard from the community about what we do, but I don't think we had input about it. I don't think we had anything to do with that proposal. I wasn't part of that shareholder meetings. I wasn't invited. I wasn't aware of them. But I would recommend, this is what I would like to see the chair do. I would like to see the chair create a task force that includes JEA people and community people. I personally would recommend Sarah Bourne. She doesn't know I'm saying this. But then the task force would each bring people to the table, and you would have the time to really vet and come up with a good solution. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schachter. Mr. Wilking, you can take the microphone. Mr. Schachter, I'd just like to note that it's not just the announcement and publication of the agenda for this meeting. We announced in August that we'd take up solar in September. Of course, hurricane happened, so we announced in September it'd be at this meeting. It has been an 18-month process, and it was a publicly noticed stakeholder meeting. So we did make an effort to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to be heard. So just want to respond to that. Mr. Wilking.
Pete Wilking, President A1A Solar Contracting, 10418 New Berlin Road, Jacksonville.
We know who you are.
Thank you for the record.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, I guess we were here about 1.5 years ago, and the fact that I don't have 50 employees here today is generally a good sign for you guys. So first off, I want to thank the board and JEA for the stakeholders meeting, which Jay Worley did a magnificent job getting public input. It was a very good exercise to make sure public input was in there. So I want to applaud that. And who would have thought 1.5 years ago so much progress would have been made with utility scale solar technology, just in battery technology alone. It is amazing how much has changed in 1.5 years on that. And I could go into a lot of detail, but I won't. Really, what surprised me is the goals, the 300 megawatts of solar, the 30% by 2030, that really put me back on my heels. So the commitment moving forward, and I know there's economic drivers in there as well, but really shows a sea change of policy for the utility company, so that's noteworthy. The fact that you grandfathered in existing solar customers, I think that was a very smart move, and I understand the dynamics behind it. I was surprised to see an actual incentive. I thought all incentives for solar had been gone, but you're proving me wrong with that, with the battery one. I'll have to echo Sarah's comment. The price points right now for battery systems is much higher than the estimated based on the 30%, but it is what it is. This change will substantially change our business model of how we do solar in terms of sizing a system, how the batteries work, and it does create a situation where we need more information from JEA on this, particularly when it comes to demand profiles, so that we make sure that we give customers a system that performs at least financially what we would expect. So there's a little bit more dialogue on that. My last point is on the commercial side, the SS1 policy. There still seems to be some complication on that for larger commercial systems that I think staff needs to look at so that we can get those ironed out. That has been a deterrent or a big stumbling stone for larger commercial customers. I hope we get that worked out. My last comment is, I know you might find this hard to believe, but I don't have any major issues with your proposed policy.
Thank you, Mr. Wilking. I appreciate that. Mr. Wilkin, if you have specific technical questions that would help you better serve your customers and ours and don't have a contact with staff, send them to me, and I'll make sure they get to the right staff person.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Chavros, and after that, we'll hear from Mr. Haynes and finally Mr. Larson.
Good afternoon, board members. George Cavros, Cavros, and my address is 120 East Oakland Park Boulevard, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 33334. Yes, I did drive a long way to be here today. I'm here representing the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, which is a clean energy nonprofit, and representing our members in the Jacksonville area here today. I want to, first of all, again, like others have done, thank staff, thank Orion and Steve for explaining the new proposal to me. I'm going to address, we were also, by the way, a stakeholder. We participated in the stakeholder process over many months. And, essentially what you've got here are two proposals. So I'm going to address the utility scale proposal first and then the net metering one second. We applaud JEA's move to add 250 additional megawatts of solar on its system relative to its size. That's a big jump and shows a lot of leadership. So we're behind you 100% on that. We have a metric that we use internally. It's watts per customer to measure solar development between the different utilities. And we've concluded that JEA will put it in, as one of the leaders in Florida in solar development. Now, the net metering change, when we first looked at it, it's very intriguing, right? I mean, you're trying to essentially create a market here for batteries and battery storage where one doesn't exist. It's definitely thinking out of the box. When we started looking at it a little more, we did have some concerns, and I want to raise those concerns with you today. The first one is for new customers that don't adopt batteries, the rate will drop to 3.25. That's a precipitous decline in the rate that will be provided to customers. That is lower than JEA's avoided cost. In other words, it costs JEA more to produce its next incremental unit of power than the 325 that they're providing to customers. That is problematic. We believe that solar provides more value than just the fuel rate. There are other benefits related to capacity value and transmission and distribution benefits. Those aren't reflected in this rate. And then lastly, we have some concerns about middle income, lower income folks that might want to size their system and not use a battery. They may maybe only want a 3 kW system. But the way you're metered right now, it's in 15-second increments. So their solar system would essentially have to produce the power, and it'd have to be used almost instantaneously for them to be able to net anything. So we have a problem with the netting interval, because essentially, to us, it violates at least the spirit of the net metering law, in that it provides very little opportunity for customers to net their total use against what their system generates. And just lastly, to conclude, we've had 48 hours to look at this. We have some programmatic concerns that we'd like to address with staff. I think maybe the better way to have done this would have been maybe to bring it back to the stakeholders for one review, so we could have had a sort of a thorough discussion of these issues. But in any event, we're very supportive of the utility scale component. We have some programmatic concerns regarding the net metering and some economic issues we'd like to discuss with staff, and we're asking you please maybe to potentially bring that back to the stakeholders so we can work out some of these programmatic concerns. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Cavros. I appreciate you driving all the way up from Fort Lauderdale and the work that you and SAC put into this. We gave you an extra 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Mr. Haynes.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Greg Haynes of Southeast Energy Storage. I wanted to come here today to kind of shed some light on a lot of the developments in storage that have been mentioned today. I personally have systems installed here in the Southeast, high-power lithium-based systems that are affordable. They're using industry-standard components from companies like LG, Samsung, et cetera, source agnostic. So the battery program that you guys are offering is very progressive, and I certainly laud you guys in looking to the future of renewables and the best way to integrate those for the utility. What I'd like to ask today is for there to be further research on offering storage incentive programs that are decoupled from solar. So any potential incentive that would be a storage-only incentive coupled with other rate programs that JEA is currently exploring and offering. I think there's a lot of value there, and I'd like to see JEA further explore that to provide the best value for the customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes. Yes, the actions we're taking today will not preclude further consideration of battery incentive in the future. So stay tuned. Mr. Larson.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is Tom Larson. I live in Jacksonville Beach at 887 Marshside Court. Several good and innovative aspects are present in this proposal before you today, and I thank the staff for doing a pretty good job of dealing with the multiple inputs that the stakeholder group provided. I participated in that. I have served as a clean power advisor to JEA for over 10 years in various stakeholder meetings. The Sierra Club, which I represent, has long been involved with JEA in air quality and water quality issues. I'm pretty well versed in utility and economic and regulatory affairs across Florida and have been involved with this milieu for some time. I ask you to consider developing another alternative, a stepwise net metering proposal that would not be so precipitous as to change the deal from 10 cents to 3 cents in February. I think that we should consider a 1 or 2 cent step down in 6 months maybe to give people time to let contracts be realized for builders, et cetera, and then have other reductions next year or later. And this was presented as an alternative during the stakeholder meetings. I'm very concerned about how the current proposal would dislocate the small PV marketplace. I think it's basically a marketing issue. We've got consumer education to undertake. You know, making an investment of $12,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 is not a small deal for many homeowners, and it's something that they've probably been thinking about for several years. And when they get to the cusp of making that decision, to find that the deal is changing so quickly may very well suppress adoption. It'll also, I believe, interrupt the ability for job-providing solar installers to do a good job in the marketplace for all of us. So I suggest we pilot or demonstrate some of these changes. We evaluate the real-world implementation schemes. We need to prove that the numbers are right for net metering and for batteries. And I have a concern that we've got to make sure we all understand batteries for both on-grid implementations and off-grid or emergency implementations, because they may have some very different cost structures. So community service and consumer education, I think, is what we've got to keep in mind here. And our stakeholders are prepared to confer with you more. I, too, am a bit disappointed that the staff didn't call us back and say, hey, what do you guys think of this synthesis we've made? We didn't have that opportunity. So I hope you'll think about that and what my colleagues have been saying. We're not unhappy with many of these moves. It's very good that we're leading, but I think we need to be leading with a whole bunch of people following and supporting the direction we're going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Appreciate all the public comments received from everyone today, and we'll discuss them when we get to that part of the agenda. Before then, turn to our council liaison, the Honorable Matt Schellenberg. Anything from across the street, Mr. Schellenberg?
No, thank you very much for asking. I appreciate it. It's very enlightening.
Appreciate you being here and all the support we have at City Council. Dr. Gaffney had to excuse himself, but he asked me to share with the board that the mayor's there to help if we need anything, or words to that effect. And next, Carrie Stewart to talk about the customer experience and some of the lessons learned from Hurricane Irma. For those of you who were in attendance or saw some of the news excerpts from our September meeting, there were concerns expressed by a number of our customers regarding communications from JEA regarding the hurricane outage and restoration of power. Ms. Stewart and her team have undertaken an exhaustive review of exactly what those communications and or miscommunications were, and I've asked her to report to the board on that today. Ms. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for allowing me to be here today. We will be producing a full report of that exhaustive research we've done. We're just going to go over some of the highlights today and go over the top 3 concerns that were raised during the storm. I want to address those concerns here today. And I know you've all heard this before, but I think it bears repeating that our vision is to provide customers with timely and accurate information during an outage situation to eliminate or reduce the stress related to making decisions about their family, their property, or their businesses. And in order to discuss what happened and what we plan to do differently, I want to take a very brief moment to give an overview of what's supposed to happen during an outage. So to set the stage, let's look at the process map that you will find behind tab 4E in your board materials. And this is a high-level overview of what you'd expect to see in an outage reporting process. A customer reports an outage. JEA verifies or validates that there is a true outage. We also check that the customer has paid their bill, and then we create a ticket. A dispatcher receives the ticket, assigns a crew. The crew accepts the ticket, works the issue, reports it complete when the service is restored. We have an automated system, as you all know from Matthew, that notifies a customer and automatically updates the outage map along the way. This process works extremely well during normal outage situations. And in fact, we saw that with the thousands of outages we had over the nor'easters in the last couple of weeks in our service territory, the process performed as expected. But for this process to work, during an outage event, all roles and responsibilities have to be clearly defined, and I can tell you that they are. And for each of the teams, there are parts of the restoration process, as you see here, they're all supported by technology services as a department, but they are also all supported by technology systems. And I won't go into what the acronyms stand for. I will have a definition for you if you need it. But as you can see, there are multiple systems assigned to each function. And these systems feed each other information from the beginning of an outage event through the restoration. So what happened during Irma? Again, the top 3 communication concerns during Irma are identified here. The first is that some customers received inaccurate information about their restoration status when they went online to look at their accounts or when they called into our call center. Many customers were also relying on the outage map for specific information related to their specific outage and were disappointed with the information provided by the outage map. And lastly, some customers received proactive notices, those included emails and phone calls, that were either inaccurate or unintentionally misleading about restoration times. So diving right into the first issues. For customers who received inaccurate information about their restoration status when they either went online to self-serve or they called into our call centers. As you saw from the previous slides, different areas of our company use different systems to get the information that they need to share with customers about outages and other issues. But yet all of these systems depend on each other to be functioning and accurate to deliver accurate information to customers. Conflicting information between various internal systems at any one point in time during the storm caused customer care consultants and customers that self-served to receive or view inconsistent information or responses to their requests for information. During Irma, we used manual workarounds to provide customers with the most accurate and timely data possible. And by manual, I mean we manually pinged meters from computers throughout the building. We updated crew assignment sheets in Excel. We extracted data from all of these multiple sources that you've seen, and we aggregated them to give customers the information that they needed. So what do we do to fix this? After Matthew, we recognized that we needed to turn off that automated messaging system that was related to restoration times. Well, during Irma, the automated restoration system was working just fine, and notices were going out to customers related to the storms that hit our area prior to Irma. If you remember, a nor'easter hit us the Saturday before Irma actually made landfall. So there were customers that who received secondary outages after their power was restored from the nor'easter, and they were very frustrated to continue to receive these automated messages. We did cut off the automated messaging system as per prior planning before Irma hit, but customers were still receiving automated messages related to the outages the previous 3 days. Going forward, we are going to ensure that the automated message system is turned off prior to the storm hitting, and it will remain off until normal operations and all systems are restored. In order to provide consistency of the content across all the channels, and that's voice, email, map, text, social media, the underlying work order systems must be functioning and updated timely and accurately. If any of the systems are not functioning, we believe an agreed-upon documented workaround needs to be established before the event and adhered to during the event. That's what we did during Irma, during the event. So if the systems are not optimal or if there's any failure during the event, we would like to have an agreed-upon workaround prior to the event. And the last minor issue on this that I refer to as the words matter issue is related to customers who logged in to their accounts to check on status of their outage and were frustrated when they saw no new or updated information each time they logged in. And they were particularly bothered by the term under assessment. We plan to audit the verbiage used by all of the systems and potentially alter words or terms that more accurately address customer concerns. For instance, we may recommend the term outage acknowledged to replace under assessment. But we will be reviewing the verbiage of all of those systems. Customers that logged in or relied on the outage map for specific information related to their specific outage, as I said before, were disappointed with the information provided. I have the right one up there. And as stated earlier, different areas of our company use different systems to get information, and conflicting information causes inconsistent information to be shared. The same holds true for the outage map. The outage map does not just appear, it is fed by these other systems. The data is fed by these other systems. We have the ability to switch that map to a view that displays only aggregated outages by zip codes, and we recommend doing this prior to the days leading up to the storm or prior to the storm. This is a manual workaround, and it would require corresponding language to accompany the map and the customer care call center scripts to urge customers to log into their individual accounts for status regarding their specific outage. This would allow users to see the overall outage information for the entire service area and also to get a sense of the magnitude of the outages in their neighborhoods or in their areas at a glance, but also give them specific information on how to find out data that most matters to them. We also recommend that the outage map does not return to normal mode until the storm assessment process is complete, all systems are functioning, and the Systems Operating Control Center has the ability to update response times in a timely manner. And lastly, the third issue. In the last few days of restoration, emails and automated phone calls went out to customers related to crews working in their area and crews leaving their area because restoration had been complete. The information related to restoration completion was not 100% accurate. There were still customers left without power, and the content of the messages that went out to customers was unintentionally misleading. And I want to give a specific example. An email with a subject line reading, "Confirmation, power is restored," went out to all customers on a particular circuit once crews had completed the repairs. While the body of the email and the voice messages that accompanied this circuit specifically asked customers who may still have been without power to call JEA, the very few people that received the notices and were still without power believed the power was still on. And there's no doubt that the subject line in the email caused this confusion and the resulting frustration from that. We adjusted the wording immediately after those emails went out. We received calls from those customers, and no more emails went out or phone calls with the misleading information. So going forward, there's going to be a strict adherence to approved content for emails, automated calls, and scripts. We're going to request that more resources be assigned to the Systems Operating Control Center for information to be updated timely and accurately, or if that is not possible, again, establish a documented, agreed-to workaround, and then adhere to it through the course of an event like a hurricane. And then finally, we recommend that all status updates for restoration, both to the outage map and to customers, are only uploaded or sent when the circuit is completely restored. All of these recommendations are already being addressed, and the appropriate teams are in place and working in a collaborative manner to ensure that we do not repeat the same steps that cause dissatisfaction with our customers during an already very stressful event. All of this being said, from a customer experience team perspective, during Hurricane Irma, we sent over 3 million proactive emails related to the storm. We fielded over 195,000 phone calls. We interacted with over 27,000 posts to JEA's social media accounts. And JEA.com processed over 1 million transactions or sessions, with as many as 25,000 sessions occurring simultaneously. On an average day, no more than 500 would come in simultaneously at any given time. And JEA.com performed great. We processed all normal transactions without failure during this high volume time. And I'll tell you, Mr. Chair and Board, that we've learned a great deal from the last 2 storms. And while we are not looking forward to another storm, we are committed to a better customer experience going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. I appreciate that report. For those of you who will recall from our September meeting, we got a little bit of a dressing down from the mayor based on some of the miscommunications and issues that Ms. Stewart's referred to. We definitely fumbled the ball or missed the field goal, whatever the analogy might be appropriate, in Hurricane Irma. I think that that should not cloud the tremendous or tarnish in any way the tremendous work of our dedicated JEA employees. You guys did a great job. We heard from several of the public speakers today about what a great job JEA does. But as to the communication, and I appreciate some of the changes you made on the fly, the reality is there are times when no communication is better than wrong communication, bad communication. And we shouldn't be sending out messages that say confirmation power restored if that customer doesn't have their power restored. So I applaud the efforts that you're undertaking. I said at the last meeting that we look to hold our JEA staff accountable. The reality is that we didn't do what we could do. We can and should do better, and we're counting on you to make it so in the future. Any questions or other comments regarding lessons learned, Mr. Betway?
Thank you, Gary, for a nice report. Mr. Chairman, this gives me a headache. This is the only thing that I worry about here at the JEA right now, to tell you the truth. And I'm not sure we'll ever be ready for the next hurricane. You know, each one seems to be worse, and the challenges seems to be greater. But I think this is a citywide problem. You know, we have the police that communicate with our population. We have the firefighters that have a communication system. We have an operations center, emergency preparedness center that fully staffed. I'm not so sure that we don't need some help outside these walls. I don't have an answer, but I'm embarrassed about the shortcomings that we did have, and you know, we know we had shortcomings, and I'm proud of our effort under the circumstances. I think we did very, very well, but we didn't do well enough, and I just think it's wrong to expect a different result without a different approach. And there's got to be another answer or some more answers. And I don't know what. There are 2 facts I know as I sit here. One is we're going to have another hurricane, and 2, I won't be here when the next hurricane hits. So I don't know what you.
Use me at the table.
I don't know what y'all gonna do. I don't know what y'all gonna do about it. But I'll be in North Carolina. But seriously, I just think it's a problem that we shouldn't take off of the list and not leave it up to staff to fix it.
It's a good observation. I'll share with you an analogy that Mr. McElroy shared with me. And I hadn't thought about it in these terms, but it helped me understand it and may help others who are listening understand it. Grocery stores work great, 360 days out of the year. And for the 4 or 5 holidays, they staff up for Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's so that when you go to buy your turkey or ham, they have it. But when a hurricane hits, the grocery store shelves empty too, and Home Depot runs out of plywood. And we suffer a similar crisis of system overload at JEA. the systems work great 360 days out of the year, and for the 4 days that we have a nor'easter, the systems work pretty good. But that one day you have a massive hurricane, the systems get overloaded. I was also disappointed to learn that in the 21st century, our systems can't tell you if your power's out. And still, most of our service network still requires you to call and say, hey, my power's out. Now, we're working to address that. Smart meters will solve most of that issue, because there'll be two-way communication. But we're only halfway through our service territory with installation of smart meters. That's one thing, Mr. Telway, that we might be able to address. If that's something that the board directs staff to accelerate our capital investment in smart meters so that we can get those deployed through our service territory more quickly, then that can eliminate some of the miscommunication of actual service status at an individual meter. So that's certainly a possibility. But I share your concerns. There is a certainty that storms will happen in the future. This is Florida. Storms are going to come. And we need to do a better job of identifying the status and then communicating that status to our customers. One second, Mr. McElroy. Anything you want to add to that before we turn it over to Mr. McElroy? Reverend Newble? No. Ms. Kessler?
Chairman Howard, I would like to say one thing. Have we looked at some of our, there are many other utilities and quite a few in hurricane zones. Have we looked to them for systems they may be using or consultants they may be bringing in to help with this process? Mr. Petway said maybe we can't solve it inside those walls. And my experience has always been go to somebody else who's doing it and find out if they're doing it better. And if they are, what are their resources and how can you work with those? So there may be outside resources, and perhaps they've already done that and talked to everybody within the region, but that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Ms. Kessler. I'm a lawyer. I'm happy to borrow language from somebody else who's written it before and done it better. Ms. Flanagan? Mr. McElroy, could you respond to Ms. Kessler and Mr. Petway's comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think maybe an appropriate response would be to give us a couple more months here, maybe the first part of the year, and come back with we've been working on a plan, we've been implementing a plan to change essentially our entire outage system. Which would be the collection of information over the next period of time. And part of that will be the continued investment in two-way meters. Right now, we're about halfway through the meter base, where we have two-way meters. That's meters that can speak to us and we can speak to them, as opposed to the one-way meter that we originally installed almost 15 years ago, where the meter just sends us information. We can't sort of reach out to it. And as we get through that, will be closer to what the industry is starting to establish as a best practice. I would address this issue as an industry issue. This is not a JEA issue. This is not a Jacksonville issue. The same issue appeared across the board and with the other utilities in Florida, and does so in terms of other utilities that deal with this sort of catastrophic or these outages of these significance, where there's more than 50 to 60% of the base out at any one point in time. So we've been working at an outage management system that collects that information directly from the meter as the meter tells us, or as we reach out and communicate to the meter and see if there's an information coming back, or it basically verifies whether it's on or off, and then assimilating that data. It's a couple of years out before we can get all of our meters transitioned to two-way. It's in excess of $100 million over the next period of time to get there. I would say, given the magnitude of that, it would be sort of incumbent upon us to come back and share sort of the bucket of cost associated with getting us to the next level of being able to respond. Now, I say that we've modeled against one of the bigger utilities in the state.
The biggest?
Perhaps the biggest. Who has spent...
That wasn't me.
Who has spent between government money, federal money, and its own money, $1 billion on this activity. And I would say that the results were not much different in terms of the ability to communicate at the customer level. We are an electric utility per se. We're not Amazon, but we're not a customer service. That doesn't mean we can't do better. I'm not using that as an excuse, but our whole protocol, background, operations, and systems are set up at trying to to get power to the meter point, get power to the customer point, and when we have an outage, it's more of an operational issue, an operational system to get people back in process as opposed to communicate effectively. As an industry, we recognize that clearly as a shortcoming, and as an industry, we recognize that we're behind the ball on this one, and we've got to catch up. So we've got plans we've been working on. Some of the ideas that Carrie brought forward are things that we can fix and work on in the short run, but there is a longer-term play here, and I would say give us a couple months so we can come back to give the longer-term view, that longer-term view with the appropriate cost as to whether we should accelerate or stay on the path we're on.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. McElroy. Please include in that report back to the board Ms. Kessler's suggestion of looking at are there things that other people are doing better, either in systems, processes, procedures, operations that we could implement as well.
Yes.
I appreciate that. And to your point, I understand we're a utility and our business is delivering electricity, but our customers expect something different. I think customer attitudes and expectations have changed in recent years. They want to hear from us. So that falls on Ms. Stewart, Mr. Cosgrove, that we have that information and be able to effectively and timely communicate it and accurately communicate it to our customers. Cell phone, whatever. So, thank you. Anything else for Ms. Stewart before we excuse her? We're going to skip over the next item on the agenda. I apologize to the Mosh Power Play exhibit, but we've already got a long meeting and there's a lot more to cover. So we'll bring them back and hear from them at our next meeting. We're moving on to 5A. That's the consent agenda. Need a motion to approve the consent agenda and specifically the approval of the minutes of August 15 and September 19. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. All in favor of the consent agenda? Aye. Aye. Unanimous. We'll move to 5B, and I'll bring Mike Brost back to the table to talk about our energy mix policy that was touched on in the workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we covered this in the workshop. It's item B1 in the package. We have a current energy mix policy, so every year our customers consume about 12 million megawatt hours, and there's a variety of places we can get that energy from in terms of fuel and technology. This particular policy was put in place in August 2010, and I did touch on this during the workshop. It was a 30% goal by 2030, targeting nuclear, really going after the zero carbon option. Things have changed a lot in the last 7 years, and the recommendation is to back out nuclear and just make it carbon-free or carbon neutral. So it would include solar, biomass, wind, anything that's zero carbon or neutral, and looking for board's approval of this new policy.
You've heard the recommendation from staff for a 30% carbon neutral fuel mix by 2030. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Petway. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan.
Second.
So I'll open it up for discussion. Any questions or comments regarding staff's recommendation on a new energy mix policy? Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Kessler. Passes unanimously. Mr. Brose, you're still on the
Yes, sir.
clock.
B2, universal solar expansion and land acquisition. This was also touched on during the workshop, although it talked more about the solar expansion versus the land acquisition part. We are looking for 5 parcels for 5 new 50-megawatt solar projects. These will be PPAs. The price has been cut in half over the last year or two, $75 down to something near our fuel rate, $32.50. We have 2 parcels that we already own that we're going to deploy. One's north of I-10 out on the west side, one south of I-10. So that's 2 of the 4. We are purchasing 2 more. And based on our procurement directives and real estate rules, we need authorization from the board to let Paul McElroy execute the 2 transactions. Will be done at or below appraised price, and we've got we're looking for 1 more, so it's actually $50 million to buy 3, and it's to support the expansion that we talked about earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brose. So we've heard the staff's recommendation. The board approved 2017-36 resolution authorizing the delegation of authority to Mr. McElroy to execute land purchase agreements, price up to $50 million. Have a motion from Mr. Petway. Is there a second?
Second.
I feel like an auctioneer. Is there any discussion? Belway.
Mr. Chairman, I have discussed this in detail with Mr. McElroy, and I'm sure he's talked to everybody. I think we got to move forward, and this is the best way to get us where we need to be. I recommend approval.
And just to be clear, this is for the acquisition of the land. So
Right.
we'll actually own the dirt underneath these solar
Yes.
arrays. Any other questions?
Fee simple ownership, yes, sir.
Ms. Kessler, any questions? I'll entertain a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McInall.
Yes, thank you.
Distributed generation policy and proposed battery incentive program. This is, again, the subject of our solar workshop earlier.
Okay, so we covered this pretty thoroughly in the workshop and certainly had a lot of input from people commenting here today, but really appreciate them coming in to reflect the viewpoint they have. I think the proposal we put forward, as evidenced by the majority of the comments, is reflective of the stakeholder input process we went through. A couple of battery representatives that were here certainly indicate that the pricing is reasonable that we assumed, and didn't indicate any problem with availability. And just to kind of hit on the last concern that I heard, listen to the comments as far as the timing of the rate reduction and the amount of the rate moving down to the fuel rate as the payback amount is an integral part of the incentive program. That's that it's removing us as the free battery that really creates the battery incentive. And as far as timing, doing it as quickly as we propose is really what allows us to have as generous of a grandfathering policy as we have proposed. Otherwise, I think we really covered everything, and if there's any questions.
So the recommendation from staff is the adoption of the proposed distributed generation policy and battery incentive program. Is there a motion?
Oh, wait a second.
Yeah,
Sorry?
the motion is going to be on the resolution.
Sorry,
The battery
go ahead.
incentive plan, it was just for informational. It's a policy.
Is it 2017-37? What's the resolution? I didn't see the resolution.
Mr. Chairman, I have a discussion interest.
Thank you very much.
At the
Get the
appropriate
motion.
time.
Yeah, I don't have a resolution.
I don't think it's a resolution, Jody.
You think there's a
Approval.
resolution either?
All right, I'm sorry, the staff recommendation was to approve the distributed generation policy that's part of the package, and then the battery incentive program was an existing rebate incentive program that was just for information.
Is that true?
Staff recommends the board approve the recommendation that was listed in the agenda item. Staff recommends that the board approve the new distributed generation policy. The battery incentive program will be incorporated into JEA's existing rebate and incentive programs and is being presented as information only. And so the approval will be for the recommendation to approve the new distributed generation policy.
All that may be true, but if the board doesn't like the battery incentive program, we could kill it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let me get a motion on the distributed generation policy as presented, and then we'll open the floor for discussion.
Move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Petway. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Ms. Flanagan.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Kessler. Second by Ms. Flanagan. Mr. Petway.
Mr. Chairman, it seems to me like we're being inconsistent here with this grandfather thing that troubles me. We've got a builder here that's got some issues that I can relate to, and I'd like to find out or ask Paul maybe how we could take a closer look at commitments that people have that we're stepping on by just disappearing one day in the near future versus the 20-year grandfather clause that we have in our metering relationship with people that are already online. I mean, it seems to me like there's got to be some kind of coverage for somebody that's been selling solar systems in houses that are connected and have contracts in line and houses that need to be built, and yet they don't know, they've been left out. I guess it seems like a gap. And I don't know if y'all have looked at that and you don't agree with me, or it's just something we need to take a look at, and if there are others out there besides this one builder that was here today, you know, it could be a problem that's not fair to the customers that he's bringing online. Am I missing something here?
Mr. McEnall or Mr. McElroy?
Well, I think it's a good point. I think there's certainly an opportunity to at least maybe adjust the cutoff point for those systems that are integrated into the home construction, new home construction, and maybe extend that to the end of the first quarter.
Just broaden the timeline
Just
on the
broaden the
definition.
timeline, just for those that are integrated into a new home, if you will, a new house construction project, as opposed to just extending the cutoff for the program, the extra 60 days. That would give from today out to the end of the first quarter.
Well, I guess it depends on the definition of, you know, what stage or phase the contract for the construction's in. I don't know, I'm not a
Permit's
lawyer.
been pulled.
I mean, you know, we need to have I'd want to be as liberal as we can. I mean, you're dealing with some pretty big numbers here.
Yeah.
Versus single shot.
Right.
Solar customers, you know. Okay, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the problem. I'd like to have some, I mean, I'm for what we're doing here 100%, but it seems like we might have overlooked something there.
Yeah, no, we agree.
Would that require a tweak to the policy as presented, the subject of the motion? Or is that something that can be handled by staff within the confines of the policy?
And on page 7 of that 8-page document, there's a grandfathering provision that you could suggest that staff provide a grandfathering provision for the new construction homes, the integration issue. But it would modify the policy if you added that grandfathering provision.
Are you suggesting that we amend the policy to include in the grandfathering homes? How do you define under construction? You got an idea as to which a permit has been issued through the end of the first quarter 18?
Well, I think at one point in time, it's a matter of those homes that are in play right now. I mean, in terms of, so to some extent, you know, contracted for with earnest money in the 10%, if you will, contracted for by the end of the year. And then we can put a time certain as to when construction and occupancy should be.
So would the timeline, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, would the timeline be the end of the first quarter? I mean, when, is there a timeline on it? Or would there be?
I think we have to have a hard stop. I think maybe just the flexibility right now, the first quarter, or maybe the end of the second quarter, but have a hard contract.
Right.
Construction, new home contract in place with money by the end of the year, and then close it out by the end of by June 30th.
It's good to have a lawyer writing this down. So, do you have suggested language to amend?
I don't have suggested language other than, you know, if there's an already existing contract for a new home that integrates the solar, that those should be grandfathered, but from a timing perspective, I don't know if the first quarter and the timing, how you want to indicate that in the policy.
Well, I think if you got the contract got to be by the end of the year. If you got a contract by the end of the year, then I think we can be a little more flexible on the cutoff and go to June 30th. If that's, because he's got either the contracts, as what we heard today, either A, has contracts, or is working on contracts for new home construction. And we've got to have some cutoff and incentive to do that by the end of the year, and then ultimately have it constructed and occupancy by the end, by June 30th.
Let me take a crack at what I understand the suggested amendment is. The grandfathered status will be extended to all systems currently enrolled as net metering customers and those customers who have a contract for an integrated system in new construction as of December 31. It'll go through June 30, 18. So I have a motion to adopt that amendment.
So moved.
Okay, thank you. We'll take that from Ms. Kessler. Is there a second, Mr. Reverend Newbill?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, so
Second.
just a vote on the amendment to change the definition of the grandfathered system. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's a good amendment. Thank you, Mr. Petway. We had several comments, and Mr. McInall has touched on some. We talked about the grandfathering. Thank you for addressing that. There was also a suggestion of tapering the net metering. There was a suggestion regarding whether or not our fuel rate is the right new net metered rate as opposed to avoided cost. Do you want to touch on either of those?
Sure.
McInall and Mr. McElroy?
We looked at different tapering options, and part of the issue with tapering is if we say knock the rate down, let's say a penny a year until we get down to the fuel rate, then over the life of a system, you're still a customer. So we're down to the fuel rate in 5 years, and 15, 20 years of the life of the system is still going to be at the fuel rate. So the relative impact of that tapering effect is pretty negligible over the entire life of the system. And we find that what the customers really want, as much as anything, is price certainty as far as what they're getting. So the tapering aspect that the stakeholders would have preferred would have been essentially establishing a net metering rate class at a 9-cent payback, at a 7-cent payback as it tapers down. And we just felt that becomes unwieldy from a rates point of view, having essentially 5, 6 different rates or classes of net metering rates. And ultimately, until the payback price gets probably down below 5 cents, the incentive as far as incentivizing the battery storage really isn't there. We ran a model with our proposal from last year where the average price of solar, and it maybe moved $150 from the total cost to, reduce the savings on the customer side. So not really significant enough to push a customer to buy a battery. And since what we're really trying to do is incentivize customer-owned storage on the system, we felt that just going straight to the fuel rate was the way to do it. As far as fuel rate versus avoided cost, yes, right now the avoided cost is about 3.7 cents as opposed to maybe 3.25 cents. As you recall, until last year or so, we were issuing large fuel fund rebates, about $50 million a year, and then we reduced the fuel rate down to something lower. So we're operating at a slight deficit and taking money out of the fuel fund to make that up. If fuel prices stay higher where they are, then the fuel rate will go up and the payback rate will float with it. Our actual cost fluctuates every month. That again would just be unwieldy from a rates point of view to be changing the payback amount on a monthly basis, as opposed to the board approved fuel rate, and allowing everybody to have input and have that be a known quantity for people contracting for solar and for making operating decisions as far as a solar and battery system. So that was the feeling there as far as avoided cost versus the fuel rate.
And I'm sorry, those numbers are 3.7 for avoided and 3.25 on fuel?
Approximately, yeah.
About a 10% differential.
I have a point of information
Sorry, Mr. Brutally, time for public comments is over.
on the amendment.
I'm good.
The amendment's passed. Were there any other questions, comments? Ms. Flanagan?
I appreciate all the work that the staff and stakeholders have done. It feels as though, from my observation, since the last time we talked about solar. It definitely feels as though there's been much better two-way communication between the parties, so I want to commend both the public and stakeholders as well as staff for engaging in those discussions. It feels very positive. I'm supportive of our battery incentive opportunity, but Ms. Bourne's comments on trying to slow the slope between the convergence of net metering, timing, and battery phasing did resonate with me. Although your counterpoint to taking, 5 or 6 years to get down to the fuel rate and having that many rates in place at any one time also resonates with me. I'm curious if there is some middle ground, which I just believe that February 2018 will be here before we know it. There very well could be customers that are on the verge of going to a solar solution where the implementation of this policy could prevent them from making a good decision for our environment and community, where maybe if we were a little bit more accommodating in the phasing, it would allow everyone to win.
Are you suggesting the step down that one of the speakers, or are you talking about just extending the time before the precipitous?
I would be open to, I think both could be feasible solutions to finding some middle ground. Either a step down that is more gradual than 10 to 3, but doesn't take as long as a penny a year, or extending beyond the February 2018 to give those people that are on the cusp the opportunity to make the purchase decision before battery solutions become within reach of a greater portion of the population.
And let me make sure I understand your point, Mr. McInall. Your point is that the precipitous step, I don't want to use the precipitous word, the step down from current retail rate to the fuel rate goes hat in hand with the battery incentive program, and that it absent that reduction from the current retail rate to a fuel rate, there's really no incentive. They'll continue, solar users will continue to use the grid as their free battery storage. Is that the principal point that you make on that argument?
Yes, yes, it is. And the, just having the, one of the things we're looking forward to with this policy in place is we'll all be working on the, really us and the stakeholders, be working to push the ball in the same direction as far as solar and battery. And until we've got a substantial incentive, being the reduction to the fuel rate, there's not going to be a market for batteries, and that's really what's going to drive the price and the availability. I think from what we've heard even here today, that there's manufacturers and representatives ready, but there's no reason for them to really be selling their wares here in Jacksonville, because there's no market for it. Like I think I mentioned in the workshop, we've got approximately 3 or 4 batteries on the system over the entire lifetime of net metering, because there's no reason to, except for really just a customer preference or a storm resilience point of view. This really will be a sea change as far as the way the solar and battery market works.
I want to ask Mr. McElroy, or perhaps you, if you know the answer. This is not an economic issue to JEA's financial health. Do we know the delta? I mean, what's the difference between to the utility from the current retail rate to the fuel rate at current solar usage or net metering? I mean, it's a nominal amount of money, I think.
I've got that if you don't mind, Paul. Yeah. So for the annual adoption that we're looking at, the net metering program would cost us, or the battery incentive program would cost $1 million a year, the cost of the rebates. If we were to continue under our current net metering policy and had that same level of adoption, so 4 megawatts a year, it's about $4.8 million on a 20-year NPV. The actual annual amount is less, but looking over the life of a system, it adds up. So we are seeing, a substantial benefit to the utility, and not so much at, even at the adoption rate we have now or in the next few years, but as more and more people join into net metering, it is a cumulative effect. Our growth in net metering has followed the same trend as the national chart that Mike showed, and it's been approximately doubling every year. And it's slowed a little bit now, but we're looking at a geometric progression, and it quickly gets to the point where we're talking about real money.
And that has real impact on the other ratepayers. I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Well, and I also was going to add from a system standpoint, when we talk about real cost in the future, and we talked a little bit about it during the workshop, the concept of storage, whether at the residence or at key points within the system or even more centralized, is where the real opportunity for more efficiency and lower cost for our customers will come. So the concept of being forward-thinking and progressing here towards storage at the residential level, attached to solar, is the first foray into really making the system more efficient, having less generation over time, and ultimately lower cost for our customers. So it's a big advantage going forward. And I would also say that the conversation, it's very difficult for me to characterize the conversation as having occurred in the last 3 hours or the last 3 months. I mean, this is a conversation that's really 18 to 24 months. And when we had the initial conversation and outreach with the stakeholders in the community, we really were at sort of the 12 cents and the avoided cost, and we ended up at the 7.5 cents in terms of without the battery. And so there have been signals along the way in terms of the movement of pricing, and there have been precipitous, and I'll use the word precipitous, drops in the cost of solar over time, over that same 24-month period. So I think that, the idea of this 3, 4, 5 months that we want to do in terms of where the cutoff is to get back to the avoided cost or the fuel rate, has got to be looked at in really the overall conversation. We've already gone we started from 12, we started at 3, we went to 7.5, and 18 months later, we're sort of at 3, but now we're putting a battery in for an incentive. And I think that should help a little bit in terms of saying, we didn't just make this up over the last, again, 3 hours, 3 weeks, 3 months, but it's been an ongoing dialogue that has sort of been national in scope in terms of the focus here of rolling back and adjusting this incentive to current market conditions and providing an incentive for the new technology, the emerging technology, to help us forward, to really think that we're going to give an incentive when all of the issues are completely ironed out with respect to storage in the marketplace. That's not why we do the incentive. The incentive is to get more focus on that to help us along, just as we did in 2009. When the cost of solar was substantially higher, the incentive helped offset that. But quite frankly, the cost has run below the incentive now, and we need to just sort of move on. So I would suggest, I think, in terms of, if it might help, we have determined the July 31st as sort of this cutoff point. If it would help, we could consider going to the end of the quarter. Another 60 days to help.
You said
with
July,
those.
not January?
I said January. I'm sorry. Thank you. No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another 60 days to give the full calendar quarter for those in terms of just the rooftop, not the new construction that we talked about in the amendment. Let's sort of give another 60, which give a full quarter, the remainder of this year, and a full quarter next year for the installation, which might be helpful.
Would that address your concerns, Ms. Flanagan?
It would.
At least in part. Any other thoughts on that?
I agree with Paul. I mean, it's, everybody's got their opinion, but the fact is, it's been going on a while. It's been coming down all the way along.
Would you tender that as an amendment to the distributed generation policy, Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, could,
Change from January 31 to March 31.
That's correct.
18. Is there a second on the amendment?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pelway. Any other discussion on that amendment extending the grandfather?
So just be clear in my own mind.
Yes, sir.
So what we basically were missing was the battery in terms of, you've included that, which was not included when you first started discussion. Okay.
That's a big add-on.
Yeah, it is.
But the March 31 is the new date.
It'll make it effective April.
Yes, if that'll make it easier.
It would make the effective date of the new distributed generation policy April 1st.
That was her amendment. That was clearly her amendment.
Call question.
Yeah. All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Ms. Kessler. So it passes unanimously. That amendment passes. Any other discussion on the distributed generation policy?
No, sir.
All right, before we go to a vote on that, I just want to add my thanks to Mr. McNall and his entire staff. Just echoing what I said at the beginning of our discussion under the workshop. I appreciate your engaging the stakeholders. I understand there was some concern from the stakeholders that we didn't go back to them yet again once this was formulated. I understand there was some concern on the rate, some concern on the timeliness. The board has heard your concerns. We've tried to address some of those. The reality is that I think every day of delay on the battery incentive and the new rate has cost, real cost to the utility. So this is something we need to move on from the last 18 months, 20 months of discussion and adopt. I support the distributed generation policy as presented and amended today. I think it will go a long way towards incentivizing consumer behavior. And I want everybody to hear something that Steve said, which is that we're incentivizing privately owned generation and storage of electricity. I don't know any other industry that incentivizes its own demise, because if you carry this as logical conclusion, none of you guys will need us anymore. So with that, I'll call...
Thanks, Steve.
No problem. I'll call for a vote.
You might give us your phone number for the public?
All those in favor of the distributed generation policy and battery incentive program as presented and amended today, please so indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously.
Good job, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you. All right, we'll go back to the agenda now, and that carries us to the budgetary transfers. Ms. Dykes. We're at 5B4.
Good afternoon. Behind tab 5B4, this is an administrative item that we bring to the board each year. It recognizes that administratively, there's a need from time to time to make small budgetary changes in the middle of a fiscal year. This would enable the CEO of JEA to make budgetary changes. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong tab here. Make budgetary changes of up to $5 million within a fiscal year. And again, that's on a $1.8 billion budget for the utility. It also provides for any line item changes that are made to the budget at year end to come back to the board after the fact for ratification.
Thank you, Ms. Dykes. So staff recommends adoption of resolution number 2017-35. Do I hear a motion? Ms. Pelway, thank you. Is there a second?
second.
Thank you, Ms.
Second.
Flanagan. Thank you, Ms. Kessler. All in favor? I'm sorry, any discussion on the resolution or motion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And
Did you vote on that item?
he did.
I did.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rose.
You just didn't hear me.
Framework for Resiliency update. We're going to get out of here before midnight. I want to leave Mr. Schellenberg's city council habits rubbing off on us. Please.
Good afternoon. I'll get us started while our team sits down. We're here today on the Framework of Resiliency. It's the fourth or fifth presentation over the year. Today's focus is on the Capacity Management Operation and Maintenance Assessment. We'll call CMOM the rest of the day, and Mr. Peters and Paul Steinbrecher will communicate a lot more on that subject. And so we'll utilize that acronym throughout. So I'm again Brian Roche. Paul Steinbrecher is our Director of JEA's Environmental Permitting. Works with Mike Hightower, and Jim Peters, consultant that has a vast experience in the utility industry as a utility director, as a consultant at a large engineering firm, and also as a regulator, and helped us tremendously in this program And we'll go through it real quick about where this sits in our overall framework. We launched this framework a year ago, give or take a day or two, right after Hurricane Matthew. Seems like more than a year. It's been an interesting year. Paul created this framework, and he framed it in a sense for us as a team to execute and deliver it. And we've been implementing it all year long. It's a multi-step, multi-year plan that will continue as we go forward, and it's worked out very well to keep us focused from top down in the company and give that leadership. It's primarily focused on wastewater, but also some elements of water and reclaim. You go to the bottom, we start off on communication, and that's the most important class that we didn't take in engineering school, but we learned. It's so important. And we can learn, and we go out and do presentations to here to the board, the Waterways Commission, FDP, industry and utility. We're pretty comfortable in those scenarios, and you help us here. We also know we go ask for help on the JEA.com. We send all our resource of information. We're continuing to work this year, ongoing communication, JEA.com, and Carrie and Mike's group helps us with that. We analyze, we plan and implement improvement activities. That's what we did pre-2017 hurricane season. It was very successful, excellent work by the team that helped us out before Hurricane Irma. We didn't want Hurricane Irma, like Carrie said, but did stress test the system twice, and it helped us to see what we could do to improve. We had the report September last month on Hurricane Irma. And this regulatory element, and Paul will go in more details, is today's update was scheduled in September. So we're basically presenting like we did September pre-Hurricane Irma. So all the information is pre-Hurricane Irma. It's more towards a blue sky, normal operate scenarios, and a little bit of peak weather conditions. But water sewer systems across the country are not designed for those extreme conditions like a hurricane. We're working that way, designing more that way, and also for heavy flood conditions. So we'll look at the context. The next slide, this is a historical slide that we pulled from an old chart from 2004. It shows where we were as a utility or community and how much we progressed in 20 years when JEA first took the responsibility for the city's water sewer system. In addition, purchased many small and a couple large utilities and consolidated those private utilities, phased out inefficient plants, and made this large complex system. We had 127,000 customers, 2,100 sewer pipe, and didn't note about 700 pump stations in 1997. We have doubled that with 264,000 sewer customers, 4,000 miles of pipes, and 1,400 pump stations. At the time, we had over 1,500 cave-ins. You can see the top slide. We've handed that out, a slide, I'm sorry. We handed it out after we published it. Where we are in magnitude scope, JEA, about the top 25 waterways utility in the country. Our capital program is $1 billion, top 15, and arguably the most complex transmission pump station system in the country. Our SSOs were 150, 160 a year, gradually went on down. So really post-1997, $3 billion have been invested in the water wastewater system. Started the groundworks program in early 2000 and substantially rehabilitated the system. And we basically have half as many events with twice as big a system over the last 20 years. So the context where we are. We use benchmarking, we track and report consistently. We do it for regulatory requirements. We do more than regulatory requirements. We do it for trends and analysis, look at root cause analysis. And then we allocate resource. Over $100 million allocated in the next 5 to 7 years in large diameter pipe program we mentioned before. Over $100 million in resiliency over the next 5 or 7 years, started from a year ago. So you look at what we do in our benchmarks, the bottom left shows the number of SSOs impacted waters of the U.S. By month. In June to August, we had 32 inches of rain. You see the spike where we started having 6, 7, 11 SSOs in June, July, and August correlating to the rainfall. Then we look at the root cause, and it goes well into the work that Jim's done. Force mains, gravity sewer, ARVs, I&I. I&I is inflow and infiltration. Picture a manhole, 55,000 of them we have in our system, flooded with water. That water's gonna go into our system, and it's not really designed for floods, but you go ahead and how you can pump that and keep it going through the system. So it's aligned with Jim's got, and we'll pass it on to him to update us on his work. Paul Steinbrecher helps do the introduction of how we got here with Jim. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Brian. Chairman and board, good to be here. So I'll repeat the acronym: Collection System Capacity Management Operation and Maintenance, CMOM. That's where we get that. Reminder, it's a best management practices program for utility operation of wastewater collection systems. This was designed by EPA Region 4 of EPA with the goal of minimizing SSOs. That's what it's all about. It's considered a blue sky program, as Brian mentioned. So as one element of our Framework to Resiliency program that we put in place following the events of Hurricane Matthew last fall, JEA approached the Florida Department of Environmental Protection about the concept of engaging in independent, comprehensive CMOM assessment of our wastewater system. The idea was to bring independent expertise on board, working with oversight from DEP and with DEP fully embedded in this evaluation. The mechanism we used to do this was a consent order with DEP. We ultimately engaged Mr. Jim Peters, who's here beside me. At the time, he was retired from corporate life, but still working with his own shingle hanging out there. Jim has previously served as the wastewater director at Corpus Christi and at the City of Tallahassee, as well as having subsequently developed and managed CMOM programs for 2 large national consulting firms. Jim made an especially good fit for this assignment, both for DEP and for us, because of his knowledge of CMOM programs, his transparent workshop approach, and because of his previous familiarity with JEA's programs. We appreciate the work Mr. Peters has conducted for that. And with that, I'll turn it over to him and let him describe his approach and overall observations.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul. Mr. Peters?
Members of the board and chairman, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the assessment that I did this year. We had 3 phases to it. The first was a workshop approach where I gathered together some of the key staff from both collection systems and the plants. And I thought this was important because sometimes these operate as islands within utilities and they don't talk to each other all the time. So by bringing them into a workshop environment, each could hear what the problems are on the other side of the pipe, so to speak. And that has worked out very well, and it worked out very well here too, I think. So we went through several days of this and had key staff rate themselves on how they felt they were doing on the many aspects of that make up a CMOM program. The second part of this was field validation. I wanted to go out and see for myself what I'd been told in these workshops. So we went out to 25 different sites and spoke with the employees that were doing work and some of the other contractors and so forth, and got a feel for how things were going. Also, as a part of this, DEP wanted me to update the resiliency plan, the framework to resiliency. So I created a spreadsheet that lists all the 40 different programs and activities that you've got going that are part of that resiliency plan. So I did that as part of this. The final part of it was creating the report, the JEA CMOM documentation report, which has some of the recommendations that I'm going to be talking about here in a minute. And I also created a PowerPoint presentation that could be used by staff for the public or whatever is what you're doing in your sanitary sewer system. So the next slide talks about recommendations, and these first 3 are infrastructure items, and I've got 3 slides following this that speak each of those. So I'm going to skip over those 3 and skip down to number 4, which are process items. But my recommendation there is that JEA stay focused on their framework to resiliency. I really think it was a stroke of genius, if you will, that was created so quickly after Hurricane Matthew. It's my understanding, and I didn't know this before today, but it was your CEO that created that. So it was really, honestly, a very good piece of work, and just marvelous. I think it focuses on pump stations and force mains, and I endorse it 100%.
There was a little bit of prodding from our former colleague, Mr. Burr. I'm sure.
He was helping. That's right. Well, it's an excellent, excellent plan, I think. Number 5, expand SSO reporting to include a programmatic overview of causes and prevention. Right now, you have a very good SSO root cause committee that's comprised of key staff, and they look at each and every sanitary sewer overflow to determine what the cause is and what the cure is. But what DEP was saying, look, we think you ought to step back and look at all of those and kind of determine, well, what are the the big cause. Is it force main breaks or I&I, or what is it? And I really thought, yeah, that's a great comment, that don't just look at all the nuts and bolts, but look at the big picture. So we've included that. The other one is resume the data dashboards for collection system maintenance rehab. This is something that has O&M data that applies to daily operations and maintenance. So just have it created in a dashboard. And finally, number 7 is continue the Arcadis large diameter study. Okay? I'm okay?
Yep. Board member on.
Oh, okay. Keep going. Well, I endorse this study also because I know some of the problems you've had with large diameter pipe, in particular force mains. So I think this is a really good thing to be doing to find out where the weak spots are and get those repaired or replaced. And I would just add that I think it ought to be now taken down to the small diameters as well. This next slide, I'm not going to spend a great deal of detail on it, but basically it's an approach to looking for I&I, or infiltration and inflow, in your system. Infiltration and inflow is a good indicator of how good or problems in your collection system. Inflow is water that's coming into your system from surface sources. Normally it's people take their clean out caps off, or they hook their roof drains to your sanitary sewer system. And it's not built to handle stormwater, it's built to handle sanitary sewage. So that's inflow. And the other is infiltration, which is basically shallow groundwater coming into your system, particularly after these big rainstorms, when the water is seeping down through the soil and it's getting into any defects that you have in your pipes or your manholes. So with this methodology, basically we're just comparing run times on your pump stations during wet weather to what it is during normal dry weather, and just making that comparison. And from that, you can look at your 1,400 stations and narrow it down as to which ones that are having problems. So it's a really quick and fast way and relatively inexpensive way of finding where your problems are on I&I. This next one is another infrastructure recommendation, but you have about 1,800 air relief valve sewer gas from these metallic force mains, and minimize corrosion on the inside of those pipes. So they're really your basic protection for your metallic force main system. The problem that you've got is there's about 200 of these that still have brass valves on them, and they won't turn. So those need to be replaced with stainless steel, which will turn. Another problem you've got is, and this is one that I saw on one of my site visits up in Yulee, this particular air relief valve was on a force main that was hung on a bridge over a creek. So the problem there is, there's two. One, the men couldn't get at this pipe or this air relief to turn it. They had to stand on their tiptoes to even put a wrench on it. And the other thing is, it's over a creek. So if this valve leaks, it's getting into a water of the state. So what I'm suggesting is get rid of those brass valves and move these air release valves back away from these creek sites. The final infrastructure recommendation is something that was discovered by Brian Spell, who I believe is in the audience over there. He's one of your staff, and he discovered this last spring at the Florida Water Resources Conference. But it's called SLRAT, which I think I would have come up with a better acronym, but anyway. It's Sewer Line Rapid Assessment Tool, but it's a really cool tool. It's quick, it's inexpensive, and it can tell you where you need to do televising or cleaning. And basically the way it works is you put one device on one manhole and another one up on the next one, and you send a sound wave down the pipe. It sounds like a church organ, goes down there 6 or 7 times, and it gives a readout as to whether or not you've got blockage and to what degree. So it's a great system. It'll help you out trying to minimize how much televising and cleaning you do. So if I would, I'd like to, do I have time to do that?
You definitely got time for this one.
Okay, let me get a drink of water here first.
That's JEA water for the record.
Well, you folks do a lot of very good work here at JEA. I've been working with you off and on since 2008. But these next 5 are what I think are really outstanding programs that you have. The very first one is the apprenticeship program, where you have a 4-year training program for your collection and water distribution folks. And it's just marvelous from several reasons. Number one, it gets these guys trained properly to do this work, both from a classroom and a field site aspect. But it also gives them a career path, and I think it's a great incentive to hire new people. As I'm doing some of this work around the state, I find that these utilities are having a hard time finding new staff to come in and take up these water and sewer careers. So this one, I think, is a great selling point for you. Number 2 is your CIP program. I think it's wonderful. I saw the planning process that you use, which is really good. You look out at least 10 years on your projects. You have a great tracking system where there's accountability on your project managers. They are held accountable for getting these projects done within budget and on time. So it's wonderful. And the other thing is you're cash funding these projects, which not many utilities can do. Number 3 is data transfer from field to GIS. I found over the years that one of the really odd things about utilities is they have a hard time transferring data from the field to their GIS system so that they have current maps. And you guys have conquered that problem. Your utility locators give you about 80% of the data that goes into that GIS system, and so you have current maps, which is really a big help to everybody in the field. Finally, the pipe bursting program, you spent a lot of money over the years doing that, and you continue to do it rather than just make point repairs and put a Band-Aid on. You fix the problem permanently, which I think is the way to go. And finally, this number 5, the SLRAT program, which is, I already mentioned, but I think it's going to be great technology, and I think it'd be something you could share with other utilities. So one thing I wanted to say in closing was I'd like to thank JEA staff and also FDEP staff. Everybody was very open with me. They didn't hold back. DEP made some great comments. And in particular, I'd like to thank Brian Roche, who was very supportive of me, and Paul Steinbrecher, who called me out of retirement to do this work, and Brian Spell, who did a great job of scheduling a lot of these meetings. I would like to close with one quote, and this comes from the board and management, and I really think this sets the tone for your entire staff. And that is, the statement is, and I've used this on about every slide I've presented during the workshops, statement is, our commitment is to meet and where possible exceed all regulatory requirements. In a perfect world, we would never have a system failure, a power outage, or a sewage spill. But the goal is perfection, philosophically and regulatorily. So I think that just sets a really great tone for your entire organization. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Appreciate your work, appreciate your contributions to our success and those kind words, and we're proud of them too.
Just to wrap up real quick, this slide won't go through the details. It's good for the record. It's an example of all 7 items that Mr. Peters' work recommended that JEA fully concurs, embraces, thankful for the work he's done. It's a great analysis assessment, engaged the whole team, partnership DEP, and it's a very productive assessment to allow us to help move forward as a component of the overall framework resiliency. And it itemized some of the things with the major capital investments they have and some of the overview. Certainly there to answer any questions. Remind us where this is. November, we did the assessment reports, started off the framework. February had a brief update. I think the vice chair at the time asked for that. And then we had April, a large update of where we did pre-storm to get prepared. And then this is September or October meeting, and we'll be back in February timeframe for more of our multi-year ongoing long-term, mid-range defensive actions, long-term standards, and ongoing, we have communication as we go and regulatory opportunities. So we're open to any questions that the board would like for any of us.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. I'll remind the board the report that came from water and wastewater in our September meeting, sort of in the midst of storm cleanup still, and assessment was that on the water and wastewater side, we did far and above better than we did during Matthew a year ago, and a lot of that is owing in no small part to the framework to resiliency efforts. So you're to be applauded for that. We really appreciate those efforts. Any questions for Mr. Peters, Paul, Brian? Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time.
All right, bye.
Ms. Dykes, you're back.
I'm back. I'm a frequent flyer today.
You are.
2 more items on the agenda for today, and I will attempt to cover them quickly. The first is to review the assumptions behind our 5-year financial plan. This is one of the early steps in the preparation process for the rating agency meetings that are coming up in December. What we attempt to do is to create a set of realistic but conservative assumptions that we use to develop our 5-year projections and update them every year, so that we can continue to deliver the kind of financial results that the financial community has come to expect and that support the credit rating that we carry in both systems. As a reminder, the goals for the rating agency meeting at the end of the year are primarily centered around, from a timing perspective, the delivery of our audit from the prior year. So we talk about the results that we've been actually able to achieve through the year. The qualitative interaction is very important, though, at that meeting, and so it gives the rating agency analysts a chance to interact individually with members of the JEA board, with staff, and with representatives from the administration and the city council, so that they can get firsthand a feel for those relationships, which are important aspects of our credit rating. From a growth perspective, what we're proposing in terms of a set of assumptions here is that we continue to project flat sales in the electric system, 12 million megawatt hours a year for the next 5 years. We were a pretty early adopter of these flat sales projections, and for better or for worse, that's sort of come to be true in the industry. And we continue to recommend a flat sales projection. At this point, from a load research perspective, we need to grow about 2% a year just to offset the declines that we're getting in per customer usage because of greater energy efficiency. And that's about our growth right now. And so it's supportive of this flat sales projection. On the water and sewer system side, we are recommending a projected growth rate of 1% on both water and sewer system sales and 10% on reclaimed. All of those are conservative relative to the growth rates that we've seen over the prior several years. From a rates perspective, over the coming 5 years, we are showing in our projections at this point, or recommending as an assumption, that we keep base rate stable in the electric system. We are showing a small fuel rate increase in the next couple of years related to our projections for fossil fuel prices over the next 5 years, but of course that will depend on where prices actually come in at the time. And in water and sewer, not recommending showing any rate changes. And from a debt perspective, recommend showing funding our capital program for the next 5 years from capital fund balances and rates, and not issuing any new debt. In fact, we'd like to show here the repayment of about $278 million in debt on the water and sewer system and $640 million in debt on the electric system.
Is that scheduled or early defeasance?
Scheduled.
Okay.
Those are all scheduled debt repayments. So just to summarize for the projections piece, we're recommending projections of flat sales in the electric system, 1% growth in water and sewer, stable rates, no new debt, almost $1 billion in debt reduction over the next 5 years, and some modest increases in O&M and city contribution. All those are going to be very supportive of maintaining our current rated credit ratings, or even, knock on wood, asking for an increase in credit ratings. As for next month, provided the board's comfortable with this set of assumptions, for next month we'll come back and review the results that are that go along with the assumptions for building the projections for our December meetings. Any questions on projections?
What I didn't see addressed were any large capital projects reflected in projections or assumptions regarding capital investment. Flat, increasing, is there a need? It's a question. I'm not
No,
suggesting
it's a
answer.
great question. Generally flat-ish on the electric side. We can go into detail in terms of the year-to-year expenditures that are in the 5-year plan. We're going to spend a bunch of money in water and sewer. We're going to spend $1 billion over the next 5 years.
Is that system hardening?
In water and sewer. Some of it is system hardening. Some of it is capacity expansion. That is higher than we've had over the previous 5 years by a pretty significant margin.
Other questions today? That it?
Okay,
You're
that's
still flying.
I'm still up. Can we load up the next one?
5B7.
Okay. And last but not least, this is a review of the operating and financial report for the fiscal year ended, fiscal year 2017. We'll start with the water and wastewater scorecard. And I'll just, in the interest of time, touch on where there are generally gaps in performance for the last year against goal. Where the first gap is safety. We ended the year at a 2.0 recordable incident rate. That translates into 42 safety recordable incidents, and it's 42 more than we should have had. So that is a gap and a significant focus for improvement for this year. We flagged the nitrogen to the river. 558 tons is above the fiscal year 2017 goal, so it's marked yellow there, but there's still a pretty significant margin between the limit that we have in terms of nitrogen to the river and where we've ended up in terms of performance. So no significant issues there. And sanitary sewer overflows, we ended the year at 57, and Brian talked about that at length in his presentation earlier. On the electric side, the repeat on safety, sales were pretty soft this year, driven by weather, and of course the hurricane last month didn't really help anything on the electric system sales side. On the T&D grid performance metrics, generally the gaps that are there are related to weather. We went into the months before the summer season looking pretty good on these metrics, and a series of storms over the summer have really eroded some of them for the year, and we saw that in the performance. And then environmental compliance, there's nothing new on this metric since the last time we talked about this with the board. There were 6 incidents for the year, but all generally small and contained on site. Customer experience, nothing material has changed in this report card since the last time we talked about it. Our miss in terms of status was the J.D. Power business customer satisfaction, where we ended up at number 12 in the index, but that was just shy of making top decile, which is the goal that we had set for ourselves. And last but not least, on the financial results, we've got a pretty green scorecard here, and delivered results that are going to be very supportive of our credit ratings, which is good to be able to report out to the agencies in December. There is one change that I will flag for board members. On the debt to asset ratio, in your board package, that is marked at 68%, which would have been an increase for the year. That was due to recording the St. John's River Power Park impairment during fiscal year 2017. Subsequent to the production of our financials, our auditors came back and said they prefer that we make that reporting in 2018 instead of 2017. And so the debt to asset ratio at the end of 17 will be 61.8%, which is right on target. And you'll see that impairment come as we get closer to closure of the power park in 2018. And so that'll be a change that's noted on this page, but otherwise very healthy financial performance. Any questions on metrics?
Thank you, Ms. Dykes. Ms. Betway, Reverend Newbold. We lost Ms. Kessler. Ms. Flanagan. Great report. Thank you very much for all your hard work. That takes us to item C, open discussion among the board on any topic of interest. Ms. Betway?
I don't think so.
Reverend Newbold? Okay. And then other new business. Anything to bring before the board? I'll only throw out kudos to Mr. McElroy and the entire JEA team. And I don't want to steal your thunder here, but the Puerto Rico effort, for those in the audience who are not aware, JEA is one of the lead contractors in assisting in the restoration of the power grid, both transmission and some distribution feeder to the island of Puerto Rico. And that's wonderful. It was a lot of hard work by Paul and his team to ensure that we protected JEA, both our workers who are down there on the ground and our customer base and ratepayers, in making sure this was a financially sound decision. And they've succeeded in doing that. So kudos to you guys. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. 3 hours and 11 minutes into it. Thank you, board members. And I'll be brief. First up, let me just get my notes here. A couple of announcements. We had great recognition of some fantastic work done by JEA members. I mentioned earlier the T&D World recognized us nationally for the integration of renewable energy, and that was just a phenomenal performance. A couple of the folks in Mike's group. Additionally, on the cybersecurity front, this week at the Cybersecurity Leadership and Innovation Awards in Nevada this week, the Center for Digital Government recognized JEA as the 2017 Cybersecurity Leadership and Innovation Award. Gary Baker, Andy Meyer, and Dan Mishra put that program together, and we've executed it. It was thought of, it was reviewed in one of our audits from FERC and NERC, and they thought highly of it and passed the word around and nationally recognized for cybersecurity. So that's a big win for us. To the board members, I just let you know that North Side 1 is in full outage. That's our electric generating unit at North Side. And it's a good outage in terms of the full turbines opened up at this point in time. So to look at, get a real good look and feel for what an inside of a turbine looks like. Still open for another week or two, I hope, Mike, if we want to schedule or have some free time to run out there and take a peek.
Could you just tell us what it looked like?
It looks like one big machine, and
I can put my boots on and I can go out there.
yeah, you got to put your boots on it, yeah, to walk around there. But they are incredible machines, and I could tell you about it. I could show you pictures, but I can also share with you. You just can't get a sense of the scale and scope unless you're there looking at it. And sense it. I mean, it's amazing stuff. And then finally, Melissa, can we pull up? We have a couple of really 30 seconds views here. No, the first one I'd like with the trucks, please. And this is Puerto Rico, and this was it's a little dark there. We can go ahead and roll up. The JEA trucks coming off the ship in Puerto Rico. This is not staged. These were just individuals that were there shouting. That's the residents cheering us on. The residents are cheering us on. So that's the first landing of utility trucks and assets and trucks to actually fix stuff. This was captured on a Puerto Rican television site and shared with one of the local stations here on the site. Over 200 combined. There are 200,000 views of this. There are over 6,000 comments on that. There are over 500 comments between the two sites, and it is compelling and chilling in terms of the response and the thanks for our teams that are over there. I want to really point out Melissa Dykes and Jody. Melissa sort of lead the charge, and we work together and trying to pull this together over a weekend, working with Whitefish. It was stop and start for a week, but finally, and Jody helped us document the deal and get it in place. And then we turned it over to Mike's team, and the rest is we saw it there. Now, after they got the trucks loaded and got settled, the next video just shows, and this was Whitefish giving kudos to our folks. So go ahead and roll that, please.
I'm Matt Stafford. I'm with JEA. I'm a supervisor for the line crews that are here in Bucade, Puerto Rico, to help Whitefish restore power and energy to the customers and the people of Puerto Rico. We're using our trucks with the cranes and the booms to set new poles and pull new wire, and then we use the bucket trucks to take the linemen up in the bucket to transfer the wires and the power lines to the poles. And these poles that we're installing are 65-foot concrete poles that weigh 12,600 pounds each, and it takes time and extra effort to set them because you have to dig so deep and make a bigger hole and put a lot more extra effort into it to install them versus a wood pole. We can put in anywhere from around 6 to 15 poles each day.
So our folks are out there doing great work for the citizens of Puerto Rico. They have noted on a daily basis that the citizens that we work in, the areas we work in, all come out, and when somebody gets restored, it's almost a community parade, and they give them water and sort of gifts and flowers, just helping restore. We're working in an area that's just south of San Juan, about 5 or 6 miles. Is the main highway that sort of cuts the island in half, and restoring some pretty large, some transmission, and then ultimately large distribution is the mission over the next several weeks. So things are working out well. We're sad to see that the rest of the mobilization is slow to non-existent. We still are optimistic that will pick up with our partners in DC and the industry.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. It's something JEA can be justifiably proud of. Mr. Petway?
I think it's worth the editorial side comment that Paul and his staff have assured themselves that this is a financially and operational venture that we volunteered to do, but it has no effect on what we're doing here financially or from an operational point of view. I mean, I've had people that don't understand that. They think we're taking away from, it's costing money and we're taking away from what we do here. But this is, I think, a humanitarian effort on our part, but it's also a business decision that was included in that process, right?
Thank you, Mr. Petway. Absolutely. This is mutual aid, and we've got a contract, and we've got a schedule of payments. We've put will be paid weekly. It's a weekly billing arrangement. Cash has been secured by Whitefish through PREPA and FEMA in order to have funds flow to us to offset our cost. And that's not only the manpower, but the rental for the vehicles and the transportation to and from, and all of the housing and lodging and cost of our crews there. Thank you.
Well done. Great.
Important to know. So that brings us to the chair's report. Mine's going to be very brief. I just want the board to be aware that I've met with Mr. McElroy and asked that he and his staff take a look, refresh our prior research on undergrounding of utilities. I'm sure many of you saw the newspaper report last week, maybe 10 days ago now, on undergrounding and investor-owned utilities, evaluating that as well in light of the recent storm events. So in due course, they'll report back to us on the feasibility and cost of undergrounding even more utilities in Jacksonville. We have more underground utilities than any other utility of comparable size. So we do more than most, but as always, when you have outages during a storm event, in this case, 100% attributable to trees and down lines, people are going to ask the question. It's incumbent upon us to ask management to reevaluate their prior analysis of this issue and report back to us. So with that, that's my report. We stand adjourned, finally.
Good meeting.
Yeah.
Good Lord, that was